Chapter 1284, The Power of the Mountain and Sea Realm. In that one astonishing moment, Han Qinglei and the other Han clan cultivators were completely shaken. Meng Hao's gesture caused an enormous illusory hand to appear in the starry sky, stretch out to cover the entire area occupied by the cultivators from the seventh mountain and sea, and then clench down viciously. A boom could be heard, and the void shuddered. Looks of shock appeared on the faces of all the cultivators, and many of them began to scream. Each and every one, regardless of the level of their cultivation bases, felt an intense, indescribable pressure weighing down all over, mixed in with a power of expulsion. It was as if the starry sky had rejected them and wished to expel them. It was as if they were being rejected by the mountain and sea realm. The cultivators with cultivation bases lower than the ancient realm simply couldn't take the pressure. Screams rang out as their bodies distorted under the pressure until they didn't even look human. Then they exploded into clouds of gore. Next were the early ancient realm cultivators, who began bleeding out of their ears, eyes, noses, and mouths. After holding on for a short time, expressions of terror and despair flickered on their faces, and they were crushed to pulp. Bitter laughter rang out, as well as angry roars and even pleas for mercy. Those came from the mid-ancient realm cultivators, seeing everyone around them with lower cultivation bases than themselves being crushed to bloody paste, and smelling the reek of gore, caused their hearts to explode with intense feelings of hopelessness. Many of them unleashed divine abilities or magical items, but the divine abilities were destroyed as soon as they appeared, and the magical items shattered. These cultivators lasted for only a few breaths of time, before they were crushed into a jumbled mixture of bone and bloody flesh. Next were the late ancient realm cultivators and those in the Great Circle. Before they could flee, they were also destroyed in body and spirit. As for the three enormous spiders, cracking sounds echoed out from them, and their legs began to twist. As their bodies were squashed into indiscernible shapes, green blood sprayed out. And last were the three Dao realm experts. They watched wide-eyed as the 3,000 cultivators were reduced to bloody pulp, and boundless ripples emanated out into the starry sky. They were in a hell of gore, and they started trembling and coughing up blood. They too were being crushed under the pressure. No. One of them began to laugh bitterly as he reached the point where he couldn't hold on any longer. He produced all of the magical items he possessed, and even spit an enormous bell out of his mouth as he tried to fight back. But all of his magical items were crushed, and his body began to distort. The other two Dao realm cultivators laughed bitterly as they chose to self-detonate. Flight was impossible, as the starry sky had already been locked down tight. There was simply no chance for them. Rumbling filled the air as the two Dao realm patriarchs' power of self-detonation was overwhelmed by the gigantic hand, and then crushed. All of this takes some while to describe, but actually happened within a few blinks of an eye. The area previously occupied by 3,000 cultivators from the seventh mountain and sea was transformed into a mist of blood as all of them were crushed to death. Countless cultivators and magical items were squashed together along with the bodies of the spiders, forming a huge bloody paste, a swirl of green, white, and red fluid. The sight was spine-tinglingly shocking. Han Qinglei's face was ashen, and the two Han clan patriarchs, despite having participated in many bloody battles, began to shiver and look over at Meng Hao with dread. Everyone else was staring with wide eyes and open mouths. Some of the women even vomited. When they looked at Meng Hao, their eyes flickered with the fear that you might expect to see if they were staring at a fiendish, bloodthirsty beast. Meng Hao was even more terrifying than the seventh mountain and sea. What power was that? Han Qinglei murmured. He looked at the horrifying bloody paste, then back at Meng Hao, and realized to his bitterness that at some point Meng Hao had long since surpassed him to the point where he could never catch up. The power of the mountain and sea realm, Meng Hao said quietly. Ever since entering the ancient realm and igniting his paragon soul lamp, it had become much easier for him to sense the mountain and sea realm. Before, he had been forced to stimulate the paragon's blood inside of him to summon the power of the sun and moon. Now, he didn't need to do that. A mere thought on his part could unleash the power of the mountains and seas. Although he couldn't use much, he was certain that as his cultivation base grew, and more importantly, as his demon sealer's aura grew stronger, the day would come when a single thought on his part could determine whether the entire mountain and sea realm would continue to exist. That was because he was the 9th-generation demon sealer and also the lord of the mountain and sea realm. Meng Hao smiled at Han Qinglei and said, "Brother Han, welcome to the Meng clan. You'll be safe here. Please follow me." Mixed emotions could be seen in Han Qinglei's eyes. After a moment, he clasped hands and bowed deeply to Meng Hao, then followed him, along with the rest of the Han clan cultivators, back to the Meng clan ancestral mansion. After formally meeting Grandma Meng, the survivors from the Han clan were given some land in the ancestral mansion on the central continent, a place where they could multiply and rebuild. In the following days, Meng Hao spent most of his time cultivating in the huge statue, although he would occasionally visit Han Qinglei to reminisce about old times. The land that had been given to the Han clan had a frosty lake in it, which was filled with jade frost fish. Jade frost fish happened to have a lovely flavor that Meng Hao fell in love with as soon as he tasted it, so he often spent time at that lake, fishing with Han Qinglei. It was a quiet respite from the brutal war which was being fought outside in the Eighth Mountain and Sea. Han Qinglei often grew absent-minded, and sometimes even forgot about the war outside. Brother Meng, with the level of your cultivation base, why is it that you're not helping the Eighth Mountain and Sea drive out the invaders from the Seventh Mountain and Sea? It was a question Han Qinglei had pondered for some time, and had been refraining from asking for many days. But one day, as he sat next to the frosty lake with Meng Hao fishing, he finally gave voice to it. Meng Hao didn't answer at first. He jerked on his line that had been cast out into the lake, and immediately a large, jade-colored fish was yanked out of the water. He reeled it in, and it turned out to be well over a meter long. He pointed at it, whereupon a nearby Meng clan cultivator approached and wrestled with the struggling fish, pinning it to the ground and then placing it into the fish basket. Brother Han, he said quietly, this war is not going to end. Furthermore, even if the Seventh Mountain and Sea hadn't made a move, one of the other mountains and seas would have. After entering the ancient realm, something had changed about Meng Hao's voice, and it somehow seemed more ancient. He sighed and looked up into the sky, toward the border of the mountain and sea realm, the 33 heavens. I'll make my move, but now is not the time. Did you ever notice that the starry sky seems to have a lid covering it, and that ceiling is slowly getting closer? Meng Hao's words caused Han Qinglei to gape in surprise. He suddenly looked up into the boundless sky and the endless stars, and began to breathe deeply. You mean the 33 heavens? After a quiet moment passed, Meng Hao looked out at the frosty pond and calmly said, I'm afraid that before too long, the 33 heavens will likely descend. Han Qinglei's face fell. He had been among the group that had gone to the windswept realm as Meng Hao had. He clearly remembered what the 33 heavens represented, and knew that there were terrifyingly powerful experts there. Well, what are we going to do? Han Qinglei asked bitterly. Before, he had taken the invasion of the Seventh Mountain and Sea to be some shocking and profound thing, but now he realized that it was merely a prelude. And yet the Han clan had almost been wiped away in that mere prelude, a prelude that to him already felt like the end of days. If war broke out with the 33 heavens, then he wasn't sure what he should do. He stared out into space, completely at a loss. Meng Hao looked over at Han Qinglei and then, his expression completely earnest and serious, said, Get stronger. It doesn't matter what war we're talking about, the invasion of the Seventh Mountain and Sea, war with other mountains and seas, or even the arrival of the 33 heavens. Even the return of the two powers who destroyed the Paragon immortal realm oh so long ago. What you need to do in any and all cases is get stronger. War cannot be avoided. Perhaps paradise exists somewhere, but definitely not in the mountain and sea realm. The true war will come sooner or later, and we will all be fighting in it. Meng Hao's eyes slowly began to shine with a brilliant light. Finally, he tapped his finger down onto the ground, causing a ripple to spread out and eventually fill the entire continent. It was something he had done frequently in the past months. Even when he was in secluded meditation, he had often sent his divine sense out, fusing his cultivation base with the lands, outlining an enormous spell formation. Meng Hao didn't actually know much about spell formations. However, the particulars of this underground spell formation wasn't what was important. What was important was that the power that formed the framework of that formation was Meng Hao's, power of the mountain and sea realm. Almost finished, he murmured to himself. Han Qinglei sat there silently, with a bitter look on his face. I still don't understand, though, he said finally. You could do something in the war right now. With your cultivation base, you could stop it. If fewer people died, then the mountain and sea realm would be more powerful in the future. Furthermore, right now there are enemies lying in wait for us on the outside, and yet we're at war amongst ourselves. There's no point in fighting among ourselves. Meng Hao was silent for a moment, then finally said, It's not the right time is coming, soon. He actually didn't explain the reason why he was not fighting in the war. only he knew that the reason he wasn't fighting was because he wasn't alone here in the 8th Mountain and Sea. He had the Meng clan to look after. Even if he didn't care much about all the other members of the Meng clan, he cared about his grandmother. And his grandmother and her people cared about the clan in general. If Meng Hao went out and fought in the resistance against the 7th Mountain and Sea, he would definitely suffer retribution at their hands. And in the end, he was only one person. In the end, he could choose to defend against the 7th Mountain and Sea's retaliation, or to escape, but the Meng clan could not make that choice. As long as the Meng clan existed, if Meng Hao stepped in, then the clan would be dragged into the conflict and be exterminated. That was why he had not stepped in, and the 7th Mountain and Sea surely realized that. Therefore, that was why they had chosen not to provoke him, and why he and they had been able to maintain a sort of fragile impasse. Expand. Meng Hao might be the future lord of the Mountain and Sea realm, but as far as he was concerned, the Heaven God Alliance wasn't very important. They had even tried to track him down and kill him, so in some respects, they even counted as an enemy. In fact, were it not for the invasion of the 7th Mountain and Sea, after Meng Hao's identity was revealed within the Meng clan, perhaps the Heaven God Alliance would have besieged them. Whatever happened, Meng Hao didn't have strong feelings for this place. After all, it wasn't the 9th Mountain and Sea. And yet, there was someone in the Heaven God Alliance that he cared about, his master, the noble Ran, who had passed the seal the heavens incantation on to him. Furthermore, after entering the ancient realm, he had begun to vaguely sense certain fluctuations from the 8th Mountain, which he knew belonged to the Lord of the 8th Mountain and Sea. Those fluctuations seemed very familiar, and in fact reminded him of the aura on his grandpa Meng's command medallion, which was tucked away safely in his bag of holding. He hadn't mentioned any of those things to his grandmother, because he actually did plan to eventually fight in the war, both for the noble Ran and for those familiar fluctuations he felt coming from the 8th Mountain. Because of those things, he felt that he had no choice but to join the war effort. However, before he jumped into the fray, he needed to make sure that there was nothing that could be used against him. That was why, for the preceding 2 months, he had been constantly pouring power from the mountains and seas into the ground to make a spell formation. Of course, all of these were things that Han Qinglei would have no way of knowing. Meng Hao didn't want the Meng clan to become the next Han clan. He didn't want his grandmother to worry about such things either, nor did he want her to feel the pain of seeing fellow clan members die. Most importantly, he didn't want to see her hurt even a tiny bit. His grandma Meng was a relative, one of the people he cared most about in the world. Soon, the spell formation will be finished soon, he murmured to himself, looking out into the sky. Another half a month passed, during which the war in the 8th Mountain and Sea intensified. Reports came in on a daily basis from various members of the Meng clan, each of which Meng Hao studied in minute detail. The Heaven God Alliance had finally begun a counteroffensive, which was still underway. Both sides were taking heavy casualties. One of the most important bits of news was that among those killed were not just 1 essence or 2 essences Dao realm experts. There were already Dao lords among the dead. Many of the sects in the Heaven God Alliance were no more. One planet after another was destroyed. If the Heaven God Alliance met complete defeat, then the remaining cultivators would have no choice but to fall back to the 8th Mountain itself. Recently, more and more voices were pleading for the Lord of the 8th Mountain and Sea to come out. Unfortunately, he never appeared. The only people who did appear were cultivators of the Heaven God Society. In fact, the chief Dharma protector of the Heaven God Society convened a war council to coordinate the fighting. The number of cultivators coming through the rift from the 7th Mountain and Sea was growing increasingly fewer. However, there was a burning life force within that rift that even Meng Hao could sense from his position in the Meng clan, and it was growing more and more distinct. It was a vigorous life force, a flame that could light up the entire starry sky, and it was slowly getting closer to the 8th Mountain and Sea. It belonged to an entity who occupied a position of supreme power and had a terrifying cultivation base. Because of that, passing from one of the mountains and seas to another was a slow process for this person. That person was none other than Sima Dao, Mountain and Sea Lord from the 7th Mountain and Sea. Meng Hao could sense him just as much as he could sense that awakening entity on the 8th Mountain. Simultaneously, both that entity and Sima Dao could sense the existence of the person entrenched in the Meng clan, Meng Hao. 3 days later, Meng Hao's eyes snapped open, and at the same time, The surrounding 9 continents of the Ming clan began to emit droning sounds that sounded like earthquakes, as if some incredible power were rising up from the lands. It was a big shock to all members of the Ming clan, and no one had any idea what was happening, not even the 5 Dao realm patriarchs, who immediately sent divine sense out. What they discovered shocked them. The 9 continents were filled with a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering power, a power which was building up toward an inevitable eruption. Is the 7th mountain and sea coming? What's going on? Everyone in the Ming clan was astonished, including Han Qinglei and his people. As the alarm spread, Meng Hao emerged from secluded meditation and appeared within the ancestral mansion in his grandmother's courtyard. The moment he appeared there, his grandmother walked out, looking quite apprehensive. "Hey what's happening?" she asked. In the recent days, she had been administering affairs in the Meng clan and had transformed them into a clenched fist. They were no longer in a state of disorganized chaos like before. Now that Meng Hao had come out, the 5 patriarchs hurried over, along with other powerful experts from the various bloodlines. Han Qinglei wasn't a member of the Meng clan, but because of his relationship with Meng Hao, the Han clan wasn't excluded, and they also hastened over to Meng Hao. Meng Hao looked around at everyone, then finally turned to his grandmother, clasped hands and bowed deeply. After Grandma Meng saw the complex expression in his eyes, she understood what he was thinking and she shivered. "Hey are you?" Meng Hao looked up at his grandmother and began to speak softly. "Grandma Meng, I failed to comply with one of your previous orders and took it upon myself to take care of a certain matter. The 8th mountain and sea has been struck with war. It's a war that I normally wouldn't fight in. I would rather stay here to protect the Ming clan. However, because of a certain person, I must intervene. However, if I do fight in this war between 2 great mountains and seas, then the Ming clan will also get dragged into the matter and could end up being wiped out by the 7th mountain and sea." Grandma Meng. Grandma Meng looked at him silently for a moment, then sighed softly. How could she not have come to realize what had been going through Meng Hao's mind lately? She actually had no desire to see him fighting in the mountain and sea war either. He might be very powerful, but in her eyes, he was still only a member of the junior generation. It might be a selfish decision to ask him not to fight, but to Grandma Meng, family was more important than politics, and the Ming clan was more important than the 8th mountain and sea. However, she had overlooked his feelings in the matter, and therefore, after another long moment passed, she spoke, her voice somewhat hoarse. "I understand. You already made your decision. If you want to go, then go. Can I help in any way?" Somehow, Grandma Meng seemed much older after those words left her mouth. Meng Hao looked at her for a moment. Then, smiling slightly, he stepped forward and embraced her. "Grandma," he said softly, "I want to send the Ming clan to the 9th mountain and sea. There is no war there yet, so all of you will be safe." Grandma Meng was quiet for a moment, then slowly nodded. At the same time, she reached out with her wrinkled hand and gently stroked Meng Hao's cheek, her eyes glowing with love. "You're a good kid. You've done so much for me already. Perhaps my previous decision was a bit selfish, but you have to promise me that you'll stay safe." Meng Hao nodded, then looked back at the others present, and his face darkened a bit. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to send all of you to the 9th mountain and sea. Let me remind you, though, that as long as I live, if you dare to harbor any evil thoughts regarding the people I care about, you will regret it." Meng Hao's words caused everyone to suck in a deep breath, even the 5 Dao realm patriarchs. Although they were struck deeply with fear, they were also quite moved by the fact that Meng Hao planned to send them to safety in the 9th mountain and sea. "Brother Han, how about the Han clan go to the 9th mountain and sea? What do you say?" Han Qinglei's jaw dropped in response to Meng Hao's words. All of a sudden, he understood what Meng Hao had said half a month before about waiting for the right time to fight in the war. It wasn't that he planned to hold back forever. He really was waiting for the right time, and that time was now. "Many thanks," Han Qinglei said, clasping hands and bowing deeply. For the Han clan, the chance to go to the 9th mountain and sea was an amazing opportunity. After all, they were no longer in a position to fight in the war. Of course, it was difficult enough for one person to pass between 2 mountains and seas, let alone an entire continent, and all its people like Meng Hao claimed he would do. Everyone was completely shocked. It doesn't seem possible. That's a huge amount of people plus a continent. This piercing through will expend an incredible amount of power. In fact, it's incalculable. The 9th mountain and sea. Everyone looked at Meng Hao with even more alarm than before. If Meng Hao really could do as he said he would, then he would be even more awe-inspiring to them than he already was. As long as he was alive, no one would ever dare to challenge his grandmother's position or authority. Meng Hao looked over the crowd for a moment, then took a deep breath and raised both hands into the air. In almost the exact same instant, the power of the mountains and seas exploded out from within him. It was as if a fuse had been lit, which resulted in an enormous pillar of light shining up from one of the 9 smaller continents. It shot up into the starry sky, sending out boundless ripples. Next, a second continent exploded with light, then a third and a fourth. Pillars of light shot up from one continent after another, radiating intense power from the mountain and sea realm, power that Meng Hao had been building up for months. Obviously, he didn't have the power on his own to send a whole continent of people to the 9th mountain and sea, so he had chosen to use the power of the mountain and sea realm to accomplish that task. Even with that extra help, he had spent months in preparation, so it was possible to imagine how much of a price the 7th mountain and sea must have paid to invade the 8th. Almost in the same instant that Meng Hao unleashed the power of the mountains and seas, as the pillars of light shot up into the starry sky, suddenly, tens of thousands of cultivators from the 7th mountain and sea appeared, radiating killing intent. The person in the lead position was a middle-aged man, the same man whose son Meng Hao had killed, Marquis Lu of the 7th mountain and sea. The man's face was grim and his murderous aura seethed. As he closed in on the Meng clan, he spotted the distant pillars of light. "You killed my son, so I'll wipe out your whole clan. I don't care what a whit about the orders of the mountain and sea lord. He might have let you off the hook because of your friendship, but you should never have provoked me." Chapter 1285, The Spell Formation Stirs. Chapter 1286, Seeing the Meng clan off. 9 pillars of light shot up from the 9 continents surrounding the Meng clan ancestral mansion. As they pierced into the starry sky, they sent out boundless ripples, causing everything to shake. When Marquis Lu and the others arrived, it was as the 8th pillar of light exploded up. "This," Marquis Lu gaped in shock, his eyes wide. Considering the level of his cultivation base, after examining the situation, he could sense the terrifying power within those pillars of light. Marquis Lu's eyes glittered as he glanced down at a totem tattoo on the back of his right hand. Steeling himself, he gave a cold snort and then waved his sleeve. With that, he shot forward, followed by tens of thousands of cultivators. The entire army transformed into beams of light that shot toward the Meng clan. As they closed in, the murderous aura they emitted caused the starry sky to shake. The aura was so intense that it seemed as if it were on the verge of taking physical form and freezing everything in the area. "Meng clan, whichever one of you killed my son, get the hell out here and face me." Marquis Lu's voice boomed like thunder, echoing out in all directions as his energy rocketed up. His cultivation base was that of a 4 essences Dao sovereign, and as soon as it radiated out, the natural laws in the area shattered. By this point, the people in the Meng clan ancestral mansion could hear his roar and could sense the vast coldness. Their faces flickered. Meng Hao's expression was as calm as ever as he looked into the starry sky outside of the Meng clan continents, then turned his attention back to what he was doing. His hands remained lifted up, and a strange gleam could be seen in his eyes as he manipulated the power of the mountain and sea realm. 9 pillars of light raged up into the starry sky. In that moment, a gigantic vortex appeared in the sky above the Meng clan ancestral mansion, far, far above, at the apex of the pillars of light. The vortex was vastly enormous and was already beginning to spin faster and faster. In the blink of an eye, boundless rumbling sounds could be heard echoing out, and a vast pressure began to weigh down. Marquis Lu's face flickered, and he lurched to a halt, as did all the cultivators behind him. Then their eyes filled with shock as they saw the terrifying vortex appear overhead. "What are they doing? What kind of spell formation is that?" The pressure weighing down on the group was completely shocking. It was almost as if there was some huge, invisible hand pushing them inexorably backward. Soon, the vortex was spinning so fast it looked like a black hole, sending out powerful ripples that the cultivators from the 7th mountain and sea couldn't endure, forcing them backward. Gradually, even Marquis Lu was affected by the pressure. Considering the level of his cultivation base, he was the last one to finally be pushed back, accompanied by massive rumbling sounds. Meng Hao floated up into the air above the Meng clan continents, out into the starry sky where he looked back down at everyone, and especially his grandmother. Then his right hand flashed with an incantation gesture, and he waved his finger. That wave of a finger caused one of the 9 continents surrounding the Ming clan ancestral mansion to shatter into pieces, transforming into nothing but dust. Then, the pillar of light which had been attached to that continent exploded into countless motes, which then began to rise up into the vortex. Rumble! The vortex spun faster and faster, and the power and pressure within it grew more intense, causing Marquis Lu's face to fall. Next, the second continent exploded, then the third and fourth. They all transformed into ash, and the pillars of light attached to them turned into motes which were sucked into the vortex. The pressure from the vortex increased again, and Marquis Lu was shoved backward, as were all of the cultivators from the 7th mountain and sea behind him. Marquis Lu's throat and tongue were dry. As he stared at the shocking vortex, he suddenly realized what it most likely was, although that seemed impossible. Rumble! The 5th continent fell to pieces, then the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th. The pillars of light shattered, sending countless motes of light up into the air. The pressure from the vortex increased dramatically yet again. Now, the only thing that remained of the Ming clan was the ancestral mansion and the continent upon which it stood. The members of the Ming clan felt their hearts pounding. The terrifying vortex caused their minds to reel until they went blank. Even the 5 Dao realm patriarchs were shocked and felt their hearts thumping. It was at this point that Meng Hao's eyes began to glow. He performed an incantation gesture with his right hand, then waved his finger toward the final main continent. Open the path between the mountains and seas. Meng Hao's voice echoed out, causing wild colors to flash in the sky. The ash from all of the continents mixed with the motes of light and began to swirl together into the huge black hole. In the blink of an eye, the black hole had absorbed the power of all of the continents, and all of their combined power from the mountain and sea realm. As it did, it reached what seemed to be its maximum capacity, so when Meng Hao issued the order, the vortex exploded with an indescribable shocking aura. The intensity of that aura caused the minds of all living creatures to tremble, and their souls to shiver. Off in distance, Marquis Lu was staring at the black hole and the huge beam of light which had just appeared within it. That light moved with indescribable speed as it stretched out across the starry sky toward the barrier between the 8th and 9th mountains and seas, where it then ripped open a rift. This was an even more shocking scene than the one which had played out when the 3 great Taoist societies created the Bridge of Immortality. It was an amazing sight as the beam of light pierced through the barrier, going directly from the 8th mountain and sea to the 9th. In the 9th mountain and sea, the entire starry sky lit up, and the cultivators there looked up and trembled. Regardless of whether it was the Fang clan or the other sects and clans, everyone had the same reaction. What's happening? What is that? What's that light? It looks like maybe some kind of valuable treasure is appearing. A buzz of conversation filled virtually all locations within the 9th mountain and sea. However, it was at this point that in the Fang clan, there were some, including Fang Ziyufeng, as well as the Grand Elder and certain others, who could tell that within that light was a bit of Meng Hao's aura. Back in the 8th mountain and sea, Marquis Lu saw all of this happen. Falling back again, he looked blankly at the black hole vortex and the beam of light. Qi opened the barrier, between the mountains and seas. His plan is to send the Ming clan's continents and clan members all the way to the 9th mountain and sea. With his cultivation base and powers of discernment, Marquis Lu was completely shaken by Meng Hao's tactics and abilities, and his mind was left reeling. He was well aware of the enormous cost that was required to open the barrier between mountains and seas. The 7th mountain and sea had prepared for an incredibly long time, and had paid an astonishing price to tear open that rift. But here Marquis Lu was, watching Meng Hao do exactly that same thing all on his own. How could he not be shocked? Meng Hao looked up at the black hole and the beam of light. Then he spread both hands wide and roared. Instantly, the Ming clan's entire ancestral mansion and the continent it was on rumbled up into the air. It was as if a giant were shouldering it, hoisting it directly toward the vortex. Dust flew about and everything quaked. Meng Hao was completely focused on the Ming clan ancestral mansion as it rose higher and higher, drawing ever closer to the vortex. Soon it was just on the verge of reaching the vortex, and then Meng Hao murmured, "Grandma, please get there safe and sound." With that, the Ming clan ancestral mansion sank into the vortex, which seemingly gobbled it up. In the blink of an eye, the black hole vanished into the beam of light. The beam connecting the 2 mountains and seas then began to vanish, starting from the side in the 8th mountain and sea. Or perhaps it wasn't vanishing, but disappearing into the distance. It was soon gone from the 8th mountain and sea, and appeared in the 9th mountain and sea. There, the starry sky rumbled and the void distorted. Meng Hao had successfully sent the Meng clan off. The Meng clan used to reside in the 8th mountain and sea, but now nothing remained behind. The starry sky quieted and the ripples faded away. Meng Hao hovered there alone, looking off in the direction of the 9th mountain and sea. Further away in the distance, Marquis Lu hovered there in shock. At some point, he had begun to sweat, and he suddenly realized that in trying to wipe out the Meng clan, he had been courting death. Now he realized why his mountain and sea lord had issued orders not to provoke the Meng clan. It wasn't because he and Meng Hao were friends. No, it was because he truly didn't want to provoke them. That was because, hidden in the Meng clan, there was a supreme entity, a powerful expert who was so strong that even Marquis Lu knew he didn't dare to trifle with him. He had power to open the barrier between mountains and seas, to send an entire continent of clan members all the way to another mountain and sea. He was a shocking, almighty expert. "Retreat," he said without any hesitation. Then he flickered into motion, followed by the other cultivators of the 7th mountain and sea, whose murderous aura had transformed into expressions of astonishment. They didn't care about the fact that they were running away, with their tails between their legs. Anybody could tell that whatever fetters had been holding this consummately powerful expert back were now gone. It was as if a ravenous primordial beast had suddenly been uncaged. Rumbling could be heard as the cultivators of the 7th mountain and sea retreated en masse. However, in that exact same moment, Meng Hao looked away from the 9th mountain and sea, turning so that his gaze fell upon the cultivators of the 7th mountain and sea. "You just showed up," he said calmly. "Don't run away yet." Expand. As soon as the words left his mouth, the starry sky grew incredibly cold, as if invisible ice was spreading out rapidly in all directions. Wherever it passed, the fleeing cultivators from the 7th mountain and sea were filled with intense coldness, causing their souls to tremble. Now that he didn't have to worry about the Meng clan, Meng Hao turned to look at the cultivators from the 7th mountain and sea, and his killing intent exploded out. He actually didn't have any personal vendetta with these people, and in fact, as the future lord of the mountain and sea realm, it would probably be appropriate to let them off a bit lightly, and not kill them all. After all, there was a greater war coming, and the stronger the mountain and sea realm was in general, the better. However, despite being aware of that, Meng Hao didn't choose that course of action. He was not a hero or a leader. He was just an ordinary cultivator, a former scholar who had always dreamed of being rich. Had they not provoked him, he could have let things drop. But they had attempted to exterminate the Meng clan, which was something he couldn't tolerate. In fact, he didn't even want to tolerate it. He snorted coldly and took a step forward. When his foot fell, an incredible pressure began to weigh down, covering the entire area in the blink of an eye. Rumbling sounds could be heard, as if there were invisible collisions up in the starry sky. The thousands of cultivators from the 7th mountain and sea all coughed up huge mouthfuls of blood, and expressions of complete astonishment and terror covered their faces. None of them dared to fight back. They remained in place, trembling and looking with terror at Meng Hao, not even daring to make the slightest of movements, let alone flee. Marquis Lu's face fell, but then he gritted his teeth, causing violet light to radiate out from him. It quickly enveloped him, whereupon he burst into movement, apparently intending to break out from the pressure crushing down from Meng Hao. "Did I say you could leave?" Meng Hao said coolly. He took another step forward, vanishing, then reappearing directly in front of Marquis Lu. He waved his hand. Rumble! An incredible force exploded out from Meng Hao, which transformed into a tempest. When it slammed into Marquis Lu, blood sprayed out of his mouth, and he tumbled backward like a kite with its string cut. A fierce expression could be seen on his face as he managed to stop in place, then glared at Meng Hao, flames of madness dancing in his eyes. "I'm one of the 3 Marquis of the 7th mountain, Lu Yunli," he shrieked. "If you dare to harm me, the 7th mountain will hunt you down and kill you, no matter where you run to." Meng Hao's only response was to take a third step forward, and then unleash the life extermination fist, shooting forward and slamming his fist into Marquis Lu's chest. A boom echoed out as Marquis Lu's chest caved in, causing blood to spray out as he fell back. Cracking sounds could even be heard as a layer of magical cloth armor, which had previously been invisible, shattered. That was one of his life-saving magical items, something which had enabled him to sweep unrivaled across the battlefield when fighting the Heaven God Alliance. He had even relied on it to kill some of the Dao realm experts of the 8th mountain and sea. And yet, Meng Hao shattered it with a single blow. "All of you attack immediately. Kill him," Marquis Lu cried urgently, face ashen. The other cultivators of the 7th mountain and sea around him hesitated, but about 1,000 of them gritted their teeth and charged forward. They quickly formed into groups of 9, arranging themselves in special formation. Those spell formations then grouped into 9s to create a grand spell formation. Rumbling could be heard as dozens of spell formations appeared in the starry sky, which then shot toward Meng Hao. Brilliant lights flashed, and the ripples of divine ability spread out. However, Meng Hao's expression was the same as ever as he made a grasping motion, which tore a rift open. The blood demon roared out, instantly charging toward the spell formations. Surrounded by the sounds of explosions, Meng Hao pierced through the spell formations and began to chase down Marquis Lu. Madness could be seen in Marquis Lu's eyes. The fact that Meng Hao could simply disregard the spell formations caused that madness to grow more intense. Throwing caution to the wind, he threw his head back and roared. "You made me do this," he roared, extending his hand and causing the totem tattoo there to radiate violet light. It grew more and more intense, and in the blink of an eye, violet chi suddenly began to swirl around. Astonishingly, it transformed into an enormous head. It had 8 horns on its head, its skin was greenish-black, and its face resembled that of a human. As soon as it appeared, a shocking energy burst out, causing the starry sky to tremble. Furthermore, the face emanated an aura that was not of the mountain and sea realm. It was an outsider from the 33 heavens. As soon as Meng Hao saw it, he could tell where it came from. At the same time, he could sense the mountain and sea realm stirring with hatred, with the desire to destroy outsiders, to destroy anything with that blood running through their veins. The outsider threw its head back and roared, causing the starry sky to shatter, and a massive tempest to spring up and spin toward Meng Hao. Simultaneously, the head shot away from Marquis Lu's hand and headed toward Meng Hao as if to consume him. "Die!" screamed Marquis Lu, his face twisted with madness. This was his trump card, something that sucked away at his longevity every time he used it, forcing him to be very cautious about how he utilized it. It was also the entire reason he had charged into the Meng clan's territory with complete disregard for Meng Hao. In his mind, the totem tattoo essentially made him invincible to 4 essences enemies, and enabled him to fight it out with 5 essences cultivators. In fact, during the fighting against the Heaven God Alliance, he had even fought to a draw with the Heaven God Alliance's chief Dharma protector. Because of that, he was incredibly confident, and his killing intent was currently surging. Now that he had sent the enormous head against Meng Hao, he was sure that Meng Hao was as good as dead. "This totem tattoo is a precious treasure that my mountain and sea lord bestowed upon me. It draws upon the soul of a heavenly devil from the outside world and gives me the power to fight against 5 essences. It doesn't matter who you are, you're dead. After you're dead, the rest of the 8th mountain and sea will accompany you to the Yellow Springs, and the Meng clan that escaped to the 9th mountain and sea will still be exterminated. Even the 9th mountain and sea will be destroyed. In the coming war, nobody will be safe. You're dead no matter what." Marquis Lu threw his head back and roared madly, drawing upon his longevity to power the totem. Stabbing pain filled his mind, making him go even crazier, to the point where he began to lose his grip on consciousness. And yet he still maintained control. Performing an incantation gesture, he made the gigantic outsider's mouth open wide. Its eyes shone with a red light as it made to devour Meng Hao. Meng Hao's eyes flickered, and he snorted coldly. As the outsider's head closed in on him, he extended his hand and pointed at it. It was none other than the 8th demon sealing hex. Meng Hao had known that his demon sealing hexing magic was especially effective on outsiders. As soon as he finished waving his finger, he waved it again to unleash the 7th demon sealing hex. Then came the 6th hex and the 5th hex. 4 waves of a finger caused the outsider to scream miserably. Black mist began to roll out from inside of it as it twisted and distorted, howling, 9, seals, hexing, magic, damn it. It began to corrode, sending black mist out in all directions. Marquis Lu was shaking and began to wither as his longevity was rapidly sucked away. However, instead of fleeing, he charged Meng Hao, face twisted with madness. "Well, aren't you interesting?" Meng Hao said, eyes flickering. He then reached out and made a grasping motion, but instead of utilizing the power of the mountain and sea realm, he unleashed the star-plucking magic. His ancient mana flowed, and his 33 soul lamps burned brightly. Combining the power of his fleshly body with that of his cultivation base caused Meng Hao to explode with battle prowess equivalent to 5 essences, and that was without the power of the mountains and seas. It was a terrifying power that was second only to that of a mountain and sea lord. Rumbling could be heard as the outsider screamed, its face twisting as it sped uncontrollably toward Meng Hao. If Meng Hao managed to grab it, then he would have the soul's life or death within his control. However, the face suddenly screamed and began to turn blurry. Apparently, it had chosen to self-detonate. As the face exploded, it used that power to break free, blocking the hand of the star-plucking magic, and simultaneously transforming into a stream of black mist that began to shoot back toward Marquis Lu. Meng Hao swished his sleeve, causing a tempest to spring up. The power of the self-detonation instantly faded away, and Meng Hao took a step forward toward the black mist. The black mist moved so fast that Marquis Lu didn't have any time to react. It streamed into his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, causing him to tremble and then let out a blood-curdling scream, as if he were being possessed. Meng Hao's eyes glittered coldly as he closed in. He was just about to perform an incantation gesture when Marquis Lu, face covered in black mist, let out an insane howl. His energy then spiked, and his skin began to turn green and sprout scales. His head split open as 8 horns grew out. Furthermore, his lips split in half so that his mouth was in the shape of a cross. In the blink of an eye, he grew to a height of 30 meters. Vicious-looking spikes even pierced out through his clothing. Shockingly, what was standing in front of Meng Hao now was no longer a cultivator, but a humanoid beast. It was an outsider. The faces of the other cultivators from the 7th mountain and sea fell, and they began to back up. Clearly, even they had not known the true origin of Marquis Lu's totem tattoo. There were only a few dozen whose faces flickered with what seemed to be panic, but which Meng Hao saw through to the zeal and devotion toward this version of Marquis Lu that was hidden beneath. "You're dead, dead, I tell you." The beast form of Marquis Lu threw his head back and howled, causing his energy to rise higher and higher. Then his eyes turned red, and he seemingly lost all control of himself, descending fully into madness as he charged Meng Hao. Chapter 1287, Outsider. Chapter 1288, Seizing All Opportunities. In almost the same instant in which Marquis Lu turned into a beast, Meng Hao could sense a rage welling up from the mountain and sea realm, which grew clearer by the second. It would be impossible for others to sense how intense it was, or perhaps they would even believe it to be a figment of their imagination. But in any case, it affected people subconsciously, filling them with a loathing toward outsiders. Of course, Meng Hao could plainly detect this rage, which filled him with the desire to slaughter this outsider. At the same time, he could sense the fluctuations of the outsider's actual body, which were coming from the 33 heavens beyond the starry sky. The rage of the mountain and sea realm, huh? Meng Hao looked at the roaring outsider, whose surging cultivation base exceeded that of the 5 essences Zhao Yihan. It's a possession, and at the same time not a possession. It's the projected image of a powerful expert from outside in the 33 heavens, which possessed Marquis Lu. However, the reason it was able to possess him so quickly was that he's actually been this thing's host body for quite some time already. Meng Hao's eyes flickered as he advanced, using the power of his fleshly body to slam into the outsider. A boom rang out and then they separated. Blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth, and it was the same with the outsider. Furthermore, the outsider's chest had caved in and was leaking violet blood. A powerful fleshly body. However, this is only a portion of the power of the outsider's real body. Now that I think about it, whichever outsider in the 33 heavens is controlling this thing must be someone famous. Meng Hao's eyes glittered. Performing an incantation gesture, he sent the essence of divine flame exploding out, instantly enveloping the outsider. The outsider roared, causing numerous huge wooden logs to appear, the surfaces of which were carved with mysterious magical symbols. The logs also erupted with essence power as they shot to meet Meng Hao's essence of divine flame. After a moment of thought, Meng Hao waved his hand, causing the divine flame to dissipate. Then he performed an incantation gesture and pointed out with his finger. Instantly, numerous mountains began to descend. Meng Hao didn't stop moving, though. He unleashed one magical technique after another, all of which slammed into the outsider as he attempted to get a better understanding of its body and cultivation base. The outsider roared under the bombardment of divine abilities. Then its eyes flickered and it extended its hand toward Meng Hao, making a grasping gesture. That gesture caused Meng Hao's heart to tremble, and he suddenly vanished. A moment later, the spot that he had occupied collapsed under a sudden onslaught of flame lightning. That wasn't the end of it, though. Even as Meng Hao reappeared off in the distance, the outsider's eyes flickered with killing intent, and it threw its head back and roared, splaying its hands wide above its head, almost as if it were worshipping the sky above. It was at this point that the starry sky began to tremble, and an aura which clearly did not come from the mountain and sea realm began to spread out in all directions. The aura then began to congeal and take shape into the form of a gigantic basilisk lizard. It was fully 30,000 meters long and had towering energy. Meng Hao could sense the killing intent of the mountain and sea realm explode to new heights. However, for some reason, it was being suppressed and was unable to be released. It did not provoke the same type of transformations that had occurred in the mountains and seas when the outsider appeared back in the ruins of immortality. True self, obliterate, the outsider roared. The scales on its body shattered, causing blood to spray out. The blood then shot out into the void and in the blink of an eye converged onto the right eye of the shocking basilisk. That scarlet-colored eye appeared to gleam with intelligence. The eye turned to look at Meng Hao, filling his mind with intense pressure that caused his face to flicker. Paragon? Not 9 essences, but at least 7 essences, he thought, shaken. A sensation of deadly crisis rose up, and his eyes flickered. He then made a grasping motion, summoning the power of the mountains and seas to defend himself. It was at that point that a red beam shot out from the lizard's eye, filled with terrifying destructive power. It shot directly toward Meng Hao, slamming into the converged power of the mountains and seas. Rumbling echoed out as terrifying ripples spread out from the red beam. The power of the mountains and seas faded away, and the red glow in the huge basilisk's right eye faded away. Meng Hao waved his right hand, summoning the Paragon Bridge, which rumbled down to smash onto the body of the basilisk. As his battle prowess erupted, he waved his right finger through the air, causing the power of the mountains and seas to slash into the outsider, sending blood spraying about everywhere. That wave of a finger caused the starry sky to tremble. Marquis Lu, in the form of an outsider, trembled and then let out a blood-curdling scream. Performing an incantation gesture, he unleashed all of the power he could to fight back. However, a moment later, what seemed to be an enormous invisible finger appeared, apparently converged from the power of the mountains and seas, which pressed down onto him. Blood sprayed out of his mouth as he fell back, his arms shattered, his chest caved in, exploding in a mass of blood and gore. As for the basilisk projection, it was crushed by the Paragon Bridge and began to howl as it faded away. "It would be a real pity to let you die like this," Meng Hao said. Even as Marquis Lu in outsider form began to collapse into pieces, Meng Hao appeared next to him and reached out to grab the top of his shattering head. It was a soul search. However, what he was soul-searching was not just Marquis Lu's soul. Rather, he was also using it as a bridge, to connect to the soul of the almighty expert above in the 33 heavens. That expert might be a paragon, but Meng Hao would still perform the soul search anyway. He wanted to know exactly how much of a difference there was between his divine sense and that of a paragon. Rumble. Marquis Lu's head trembled and his eyes were fixed on Meng Hao. As of that moment, Meng Hao could see all of his memories, and at the same time he could sense a faint and fraying thread connecting Marquis Lu to the 33 heavens above the starry sky. Without a moment of hesitation, he began to follow that thread. In almost the exact same instant that he began to follow the thread, his mind trembled, and he sensed a powerful will on the other end, something that he couldn't match up to by even 10%. He only made brief contact with that entity via divine sense, and yet the backlash almost destroyed him. He shot backward, eyes gleaming. He wasn't thinking about how he had almost been destroyed, nor was he thinking about his injuries. Instead, he was thinking about the rare chance he had. It was an opportunity to dramatically increase the power of his divine sense. A roar was echoing out from that towering divine sense, as if the soul-searching Meng Hao had instigated was an unprecedented provocation of the paragon in the 33 heavens. Divine sense rumbled out, shooting directly toward Meng Hao to eradicate him. All of these things take some time to describe, but this battle of divine sense actually happened in an instant. Meng Hao's divine sense began to collapse almost immediately, and he followed the tiny remaining thread back into the mountain and sea realm. At the same time, the divine sense from the 33 heavens, Paragon, followed him. Blood instantly sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth, and his face went deathly pale. He shot backward, and Marquis Lu's head exploded into a haze of blood. At the same time, that boundless divine sense power shot out from the blood toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao's eyes flickered as killing intent exploded out from all directions, enveloping everything. The divine sense was instantly suppressed, and simultaneously the thread connecting it to the 33 heavens was severed due to Marquis Lu's death. The pressure of the entire mountain and sea realm had severed the divine sense from its true form. Next, Meng Hao, eyes glittering, suddenly opened his mouth and sucked in a huge breath. As he did, rumbling sounds echoed out, and the divine sense was absorbed into his body. His mind felt like it was about to explode, and blood oozed out of his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. However, at the same time, the power of the Tao Divinity Scripture rotated madly within him. After cultivating the Tao Divinity Scripture, Meng Hao had long since come to realize that it was actually a supreme Taoist scripture, designed to allow the person who cultivated it to consume the divine sense of others and make it their own. However, this time, he was consuming the divine sense of a paragon. Although it was only a bit of the entire thing to Meng Hao, it counted as a significant increase. He was shaking and blood was pouring out of his orifices. A mist of blood surrounded him and pain racked his body. He felt like he was about to explode. He coughed up one mouthful of blood after another, and his body shook so violently it felt like it would collapse. His eternal stratum operated madly, forcing him to stay alive. Over and over again, blood sprayed out of his mouth, and he hovered on the brink of collapse. He was a mangled mass of blood, and the flame of his life force was teetering on the verge of being extinguished. And yet, his eyes were shining brightly. Then a roar echoed out from beyond the starry sky, from the 33 heavens, a roar of rage that could destroy heaven and earth. A moment later, Meng Hao shuddered, and then the collapse of his body stopped. The paragon's divine sense had been forcefully absorbed and suppressed, but only temporarily. He needed to quickly find a suitable place to go into secluded meditation and fuse with it. His eyes were shot with blood, and his body was incredibly weak. However, his divine sense had experienced explosive growth and was at least twice as powerful as before, and he had just begun the absorption. With that vastly more powerful divine sense, he looked over at the cultivators of the seventh mountain and sea, who stood there trembling, not even daring to look at him. Most of them had heads bowed and were kneeling in worship. Meng Hao wiped the blood off of his mouth, then coldly looked up into the depths of the sky. Just now, he had experienced a brush with death. Consuming the divine sense of a paragon had been a very risky thing to do. Even the paragon out in the 33 heavens had never even considered that someone would do something so wildly insane. That was because that person didn't know Meng Hao, and didn't know his philosophy that not acquiring something was the same as losing it. Meng Hao was the type of person who, when encountering a paragon whom he couldn't kill, would scheme to take that person's divine sense. Rewards come only with risk. How true, how true. Meng Hao licked his lips. /expand. Meng Hao ignored the reverence being offered by the cultivators from the seventh mountain and sea. He turned and vanished, killing no one. The fact that they had all been so shocked by the sudden appearance of an outsider was very telling. However, there had been some whose eyes had revealed looks of devotion, although they had pretended to be surprised. As for those people, a moment later their heads all exploded, and they were killed in body and spirit. The survivors looked around in shock, then slowly dispersed. None of them went back to the battlefields in the Heaven God Alliance. To them, seeing Marquis Lu turn into an outsider was a huge shock. Because of the seed of hatred toward outsiders which had been planted in their hearts, they began to speculate as to the implications of what had occurred. When Meng Hao reappeared, he was far off in the distance, where he yet again coughed up a mouthful of blood. The paragon's divine sense had once again burst out within him, breaking past its suppression. The Tao Divinity Scripture then began to operate madly, consuming the divine sense. Meng Hao gritted his teeth as blood spurted out of his wounds, and his body hovered on the brink of collapse. He then struggled to perform a teleportation, reappearing on an asteroid some distance away. He quickly bored his way into the heart of the asteroid, where he sat down cross-legged, closed his eyes, and began to meditate. Before slipping into deep meditation, he quickly set up layer upon layer of restrictive spells around himself. If anyone had been watching, they would have even seen the asteroid distort and then seemingly vanish. In reality, it had merely been cloaked. No one would be able to detect the asteroid or Meng Hao unless they had a cultivation base and divine sense superior to his. 7 days passed by rather quickly. During that time, Meng Hao experienced numerous near-death encounters. His body almost collapsed several times and was barely held together by his eternal stratum, as well as the consumption of medicinal pills. He became quite gaunt, until he was almost nothing more than skin and bones. However, his eyes shone brightly, the reason being that during the 7 days, his divine sense grew vastly more powerful. In fact, by now, it had experienced threefold growth compared to before. Such explosive growth in divine sense enabled Meng Hao to be much more confident regarding the use of his cultivation base, and also helped him to understand his divine abilities and magical techniques much better. Not only was he able to control and use them better, but more importantly, the increase in divine sense led him to the position where extinguishing the soul lamps of the ancient realm was now a distinct possibility. After the 7 days passed, Meng Hao opened his eyes. His body was no longer hovering on the brink of collapse. He was weak, and yet the flame of his life force now burned hotter than ever and was much more stable. "Finally, it's all been consumed," he said slowly, eyes shining with intense brightness. "My divine sense is now 30% that of the divine sense of a paragon." A smile twisted his face as he waved his sleeve, causing 33 soul lamps to suddenly appear around him. After examining them for a moment, he gritted his teeth and closed his eyes. Rotating his cultivation base, he began to heal himself. Because of the increase in his divine sense, his eternal stratum was now much more powerful, which made him recover even faster. This time, it only took a single day to recover from his gaunt state. Now, his cultivation base and his fleshly body were completely recovered to their peak state, as was his soul and divine sense. Finally, he opened his eyes and looked at his first soul lamp. That lamp was at its peak, and was the first of the lot to have ceased absorbing the energy of heaven and earth. Meng Hao studied the lamp for a while, and the decisiveness in his eyes slowly began to turn into hesitation. After a while, though, the decisiveness returned, and he made his decision. He would extinguish his first soul lamp, and experience that reversal of life and death that occurred along with the extinguishing of soul lamps. "I have to extinguish these soul lamps eventually anyway. I'm now unprecedentedly powerful in terms of my fleshly body and my divine sense. Furthermore, I can tell that power of one's divine sense and the strength of one's soul are critical factors in extinguishing soul lamps. At the same time, I can test out if extinguishing the first soul lamp will have some effect on the other soul lamps' capacity to absorb the energy of heaven and earth." Meng Hao eyed the first soul lamp, then clenched his jaw and unhesitatingly waved his hand in the direction of the lamp. The first soul lamp immediately began to sway back and forth, and the flame inside began to flicker, as if it could be extinguished at any moment. That effect was the result, not of Meng Hao's actual waving of the hand, but rather the fact that all his willpower was focused on extinguishing the lamp. Only when one's will and body are aligned can the lamps be extinguished. "Extinguish," he said softly. As the words left his mouth, the flame of the first soul lamp winked out. In the moment it was extinguished, Meng Hao trembled. The soul lamp was absorbed into his soul and also connected to his blood, as if it had become part of his very life. In that moment, though, the shadow of death completely covered him. Meng Hao began to shiver as the flame of his life force rapidly darkened. His vitality waned, on the verge of winking out, and his cultivation base couldn't rotate. Even the power of his divine sense was difficult to operate, and his thoughts began to fade. An aura of death gradually began to emanate out from him, growing stronger and stronger. His soul also withered, and his fleshly body seemed to decay. It was a strange sight. Meng Hao seemed to be hovering on the verge of death, his aura becoming weaker and weaker. If anyone could observe him in that moment, that is what they would see. The truth of the matter, though, was that although Meng Hao's eyes were shut, he was looking at a different world. The inside of the asteroid was completely gray, and in fact, everything that he could see was also gray. He rose to his feet and was shocked to find that his body remained in the same position as before, sitting there cross-legged. What had risen up was apparently his soul, which was in the process of dispersing. He stepped forward and looked back at his fleshly body sitting there in meditation. He could see that his body was withering and that his blood was wasting away. He saw the thick aura of death and realized that his soul was dispersing. All of that made Meng Hao feel as if he were right at death's door. "So this is what it's like to extinguish the soul lamps of the ancient realm," he murmured. It was back in the Fang clan that he had learned about extinguishing soul lamps. What he had learned was that every ancient realm cultivator experienced something different in the moment of extinguishing. Not only every person, but every single lamp was different. However, throughout all the years, a certain general set of rules become clear to cultivators. My extinguishing of soul lamps in the ancient realm will be comprised of the 7 desolations, he murmured, eyes shining. Every 5 lamps brings 1 desolation. Few people experience the 4th desolation, and even rarer is the 5th desolation. Some people only experience the 3rd desolation. The further along you get, the more dangerous they become. The first desolation is also called the desolation of delusion. Well then, this must be the desolation of delusion. Meng Hao walked back, sat down cross-legged in the same position as his fleshly body, and attempted to reconnect his soul. However, nothing worked. It was as if his body were rejecting his soul. Meng Hao frowned, then stood up again. His fleshly body was even more withered than before, causing his expression to turn grim. He suddenly flickered into motion, appearing outside of the asteroid. When he looked around, he saw nothing but endless fog, swirling and churning. Everything was completely silent. The desolation of delusion, he murmured, the desolation of delusion. Where does the delusion part come in? He turned to look back in the direction of the asteroid and suddenly realized that the asteroid had changed. It was now a huge crimson heart thumping and writhing. Countless faces could be seen on its surface, all of them howling at Meng Hao. Furthermore, those faces looked familiar. They were all the people he had killed in his life. He looked coldly at the faces and began to back up slowly. In that instant, a huge hand appeared, covered with blood-colored scales. It shot out from within the heart, rumbling toward him as it sought to crush him, causing everything in the area to shatter. Its power caused the surrounding fog to writhe, and as it stretched out, it was joined by a vicious voice that echoed out from inside the heart. Meng Hao, I've been waiting for a long time. Didn't I say that when the time came to extinguish your soul lamps I would come back? The roar echoed out in all directions, and the heart began to shrink. In the blink of an eye, it shattered, disappearing along with the hand. However, the cold voice continued to echo out. I've erased the projection of your fleshly body. You'll never find the path back now. You're stuck here. Soon, your fleshly body will wither up completely and your blood will run dry. Your divine sense will vanish and your soul will dissipate within this place. Meng Hao's face darkened, and he waved his sleeve. Instantly, the shattered pieces of the heart which had been flying about stopped falling down. The desolation of delusion is this entire place, he thought. A desolate, illusory world which appears after extinguishing the first soul lamp. My soul was pulled in here, and if I can't get it back into my fleshly body before my body withers up, then I'll definitely die. Whoever thought that the extinguishing of the first soul lamp would be like this? If I hadn't consumed that divine sense from the 33 heavens paragon, then this might have been a bit of a difficult situation. But now, Meng Hao laughed coldly. After all, despite being only a soul, his divine sense was still there. Suddenly, that divine sense exploded out, sweeping around him in all directions. In the blink of an eye, his divine sense spread out to cover an area the size of what his previous divine sense could reach at its very limit. To him, however, that was merely 30% of his total divine sense. Again, he said, sending his divine sense sweeping out even further in all directions, sending out boundless ripples that caused the fog to seethe. Gotcha, he said, eyes glittering. Astonishingly, he had just caught sight of an asteroid off in the fog, an asteroid which was the location of his fleshly body. Impossible, someone roared madly from within the fog. It was the same voice that had spoken just now, which was also the same voice he had heard during his ancient tribulation. Chapter 1289, Extinguishing the First Lamp. Chapter 1290, Returning to the Heaven God Alliance. Nothing's impossible, Meng Hao said with a cold snort. His divine sense exploded out, and the fog within it seethed as though some gigantic, invisible hand were stirring it. It only took a moment for all of the fog to begin to spin around. If it were possible to view the scene from high above, it would appear as if all of the fog in the world had transformed into a vortex, breaking the silence and causing rumbling sounds to echo out in all directions. Meng Hao's expression was the same as ever as he hovered there in the center of the vortex, his body seemingly ethereal and illusory. At the same time, a powerful aura emanated out from him, the power of his soul, combined with the power of his divine sense. By this point, Meng Hao's divine sense was at 40% of the power of a paragon. Such power might not seem like much, but in truth, it had already reached a shocking level. After all, the power of the divine sense of a 5 essences Tao sovereign was only 10% of that of a paragon. Even the various powerful mountain and sea lords would at most have 30%. Only 6 essences Tao sovereigns, at their very peak, could come close to 40 or 50%. Right now, though, Meng Hao already had the divine sense of a six essences Tao sovereign, and when it exploded out, wild colors flashed in heaven and earth, and the starry sky trembled. After all, a six essences Tao sovereign was the most powerful entity in existence beneath a paragon. Furthermore, paragons were incredibly rare. For the most part, six essences Tao sovereigns could be considered invincible. Meng Hao's divine sense rumbled out and his energy soared. He strode forward, and when his foot fell, he was directly back in front of the asteroid. All it took was a single step. In that instant, a furious roar echoed out from within the void, and the huge hand with red scales stretched out to crush Meng Hao. "Just what I was waiting for," Meng Hao said with a cold snort. As the hand closed in on him, Meng Hao raised his arms, and his eyes flickered with a cold gleam of killing intent. Detonate? As soon as he uttered that single word, this entire world, which was suffused with his divine sense, exploded out with destructive power that began to tear away at everything, starting at the borders, with Meng Hao's location in the center. From a distance, it would look as though the edges of the vortex were collapsing, layer by layer, growing closer to the middle. Even the body from which the huge hand extended, which was hidden within the void, was being enveloped by the destructive power of Meng Hao's divine sense. Massive, shocking rumbling could be heard, and the scaled hand didn't even have a chance to reach Meng Hao. A miserable scream rang out as it was overwhelmed by divine sense, and then shredded to pieces. At the same time, not too far off from Meng Hao, within the void, an enormous figure became visible. It was just an outline and was impossible to distinguish clearly, but it was fully 30,000 meters tall, with two horns growing out of its head. It was crimson and was apparently a unique greater demon. As Meng Hao's destructive divine sense overwhelmed it, it howled. "I'm gonna kill you," it shrieked, fighting back against the power of Meng Hao's divine sense and even taking a step forward as if to approach him. Meng Hao's expression was cold as he waved his hand at the figure. "Scram," all he said was a single word. However, when that single word left his mouth, the power of his divine sense became even more explosive. Now, it didn't spread out in all directions, it was completely focused on a single point. Instead of shattering his surroundings, he used all of that power to create a tempest which swept over the enormous figure. Massive rumbling sounds echoed out, and the huge creature howled miserably. It was no longer trying to approach Meng Hao, but instead was being shoved back relentlessly by the tempest that was Meng Hao's divine sense. "I refuse to accept this," the creature roared furiously. However, it couldn't prevent itself from being forced backward, and in the blink of an eye it was far, far off in the distance. "You refuse, and so do I," Meng Hao said coolly. "Next time, you don't need to come looking for me, I'll come find you." With that, he strode toward the asteroid, floated inside, and then found his fleshly body sitting there cross-legged. His body was withered to an extreme degree and abounded with an aura of death. He was clearly on the verge of dying. Meng Hao didn't hesitate for a moment. He quickly approached his body and then sat down cross-legged in the same position. His mind rumbled and then he fused. Back in the 8th mountain and sea, within that asteroid that no one could see, the cross-legged Meng Hao suddenly trembled. Then his eyes snapped open, and their previously listless gray color changed to a bright gleam. At the same time, his fleshly body reverted from its withered state, and the aura of death vanished from his blood and flesh. His life force gradually began to surge. Meng Hao took a deep breath, then slowly closed his eyes. His first soul lamp was now completely extinguished. A wisp of smoke curled up, which almost seemed to possess intelligence as it swirled into his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. In that instant, the extinguished soul lamp erupted with a shocking aura that filled Meng Hao. He shivered as his fleshly body was fully restored, and his blood began to flow vigorously. At the same time, his cultivation base rose up. Everything except the physical aspect of him was rapidly increasing in power. It was the same with his soul and his divine sense. Everything rocketed up. His divine sense increased, although not doubling as he had expected, but rather increasing by a fraction. Even still, Meng Hao's energy had now reached a completely shocking level. His aura climbed, and he virtually thrummed with the sensation of increasing power. 3 days passed by in the blink of an eye. Suddenly, the void distorted as the previously invisible asteroid once again became visible. Then it collapsed, although no sound emanated out at all. The entire massive asteroid noiselessly transformed into ash as if it had disintegrated. Floating within that ash was a cross-legged figure, Meng Hao. He was surrounded by 33 soul lamps, 32 lit, one extinguished. Ripples spread out from him that caused the starry sky to tremble, but then quickly vanished. His eyes snapped open and they glowed brightly. For some reason, even the starry sky seemed to brighten. Meng Hao took a deep breath, causing massive amounts of the energy of heaven and earth to rumble into him. Then, he slowly breathed out. "The ancient realm," he said softly, "this is where cultivators can advance by leaps and bounds, a place where the rotten can be changed into the magical. What a mystical realm." With that, he rose to his feet, whereupon cracking sounds echoed out from inside him. Meng Hao looked over the rest of the 32 lit soul lamps, then slowly shook his head. "Unfortunately, it's not as I had speculated before. The remaining soul lamps will not become more powerful as I do." Finally, he waved his sleeve, causing the soul lamps to grow blurry and fade away. "I need to finish things here in the 8th mountain and sea, and then get to the 4th mountain and sea as quickly as possible, to bring Su Qing back." He turned his head to look off in the direction of the 7th mountain and sea, except what he was looking at was not that 7th mountain and sea, but rather several mountains and seas beyond, to the 4th mountain and sea. According to the memories of Marquis Lu, war is not just being fought here. After reviewing the information he had gleaned from the Soul Search, he realized that the 7th mountain and sea wasn't the only mountain and sea within the realm which was invading a neighbor. The 6th mountain and sea has also started a mountain and sea war. The 7th mountain and sea invaded the 8th with more than one purpose in mind. They also want to use this location as a spot from which to march on to the 9th mountain and sea. As for the 6th mountain and sea, they have invaded the 5th mountain and sea with exactly the same goal in mind: to lock down a position from which to attack the most powerful of all the mountains and seas, the 4th. After a moment of thought, Meng Hao took a step forward, heading in the direction of the Heaven God Alliance. Without having to worry about the Meng clan, he was free to act however he wished. In his view, the best way to end the war was not to simply prevent the cultivators of the 7th mountain and sea from attacking the 8th mountain and sea. Instead, he needed to go to the rift between the two mountains and seas to face the ever-nearing lord of the 7th mountain and sea. His eyes flickered thoughtfully as he got closer and closer to the Heaven God Alliance. As he did, he could sense familiar fluctuations coming from the 8th mountain, which was located within the territory of the Heaven God Alliance. Several hours later, Meng Hao was at one of the entrances to the Heaven God Alliance. The planet that had once existed there was gone. It had become nothing more than rubble filled with corpses and ruins. This was a place the 7th mountain and sea had long since attacked and breached. It had also become their command center, and the ruins stretching out bore strong semblance to the ruins of immortality. Both were the crumbled remnants left behind by war. Meng Hao looked around and then proceeded into the territory of the Heaven God Alliance. As he went along, he could sense the ripples that were the remnants of magical techniques, as well as the all-pervasive sensation of blood and gore. Off in the distance, he saw a few dozen figures making their way through the ruins and rubble, searching for cultivators who were feigning death and killing them, then looting their magical items and bags of holding. As soon as Meng Hao appeared, those figures saw him, and almost immediately their eyes flickered with killing intent. They sent their divine sense out, and when it reached Meng Hao, they could tell that he was only in the ancient realm, and vicious smiles broke out on their faces. "So it's a leftover cultivator from the 8th mountain and sea. Kill him." As soon as the words rang out, the dozens of cultivators powered up their cultivation bases, and their killing intent surged. Their eyes were red from the months of killing they had already participated in. Unfortunately for them, their cultivation bases didn't qualify to be able to detect how truly terrifying Meng Hao was. Thinking him to be just another cultivator who had survived the recent battle, they closed in to finish him off. /expand. It was almost as if Meng Hao didn't even notice those incoming cultivators. He proceeded along as before, but then casually waved his hand. Instantly, the dozen or so cultivators began to tremble. Their faces went slack, then they toppled over and became a part of the surrounding ruins. Meng Hao didn't kill them, but rather dispersed their consciousness, putting them into a state of sleep from which they would awaken in a few months. As he traveled through the Heaven God Alliance, he noticed many places where planets had once existed which were now nothing more than rubble. Everything was in ruins, and corpses could be seen everywhere, cultivators from both the 8th and the 7th mountain and sea. Meng Hao's face was very grim as he went along, getting deeper and deeper into the territory of the Heaven God Alliance. Up ahead, he could sense heaven shaking, earth-shattering ripples, and could even hear the sounds of screaming mixed in, along with massive explosions. That was clearly where the front lines of the battle were. His divine sense expanded out, spreading out through virtually the entire Heaven God Alliance. In that whole area, there were only two people he cared about. One was the noble Ran, and the other was on the 8th mountain. In fact, those two people were the entire reason why he had come here to begin with. With his divine sense, Meng Hao could see that half of the former Heaven God Alliance's territory was now in complete ruin and was controlled by the 7th mountain and sea. By now, their cultivators numbered in the millions and had been divided into 4 main armies which stabbed into the Heaven God Alliance from 4 different directions. The cultivators of the Heaven God Alliance were also split into 4 main armies to defend against the various offenses. However, it was obvious that they were being forced inexorably back and would eventually be defeated. There was little hope of achieving victory. Not too far away from Meng Hao, in the starry sky of the Heaven God Alliance, in the most bloody and bitter of the 4 battlefields, a shattered planet was transforming into a black hole and had begun swallowing up many of the surrounding cultivators. A grand battle was being fought here, with more than 700,000 cultivators on each side. It was a spectacular, sprawling fight, and at any particular moment the shrill cries of the dying could be heard. Explosions echoed out constantly, and the glow of magical techniques rose up high into the starry sky. Terrifying ripples spread out chaotically, and the entire scene was one of disorder. Higher up was where the Tao realm experts were fighting. Meng Hao could see the chief Dharma protector of the Heaven God Society, as well as the boy Zhao Yihan. The two of them were locked in a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering battle. Clearly, the chief Dharma protector was no match for Zhao Yihan. However, he wore a green suit of armor that boosted his power to the point where he could at least hold his own. There were more than a few Tao realm experts in the battle, and wherever they fought, massive booms and explosions echoed out. Meng Hao caught sight of the first patriarch of the righteous noble sect, who was in a very sorry state and seemed to be on his last legs. Meng Hao continued to scan the battlefield until he finally found the noble Ran. Shockingly, he was up against 2 Tao realm experts from the 7th mountain and sea who were attacking him in unison. It was a breathtaking battle, and unfortunately, he was weakening by the moment. His body a mass of wounds and injuries, and his face was completely ashen. He looked like an oil lamp running low on fuel, sputtering on the verge of being extinguished. As soon as Meng Hao caught sight of him, his eyes flickered coldly, and he took a step in that direction. On the battlefield itself, the noble Ran was laughing bitterly. Booms rang out and blood spurted from his wounds as he was forced back relentlessly. His injuries were many and serious. In the past months, he had been in so many fights he had lost count. Despite fighting so bitterly, the mad advance of the 7th mountain and sea was unstoppable. The righteous noble sect was no more. Vast numbers of disciples had been killed, and the 3rd patriarch was dead. Only the noble Ran and the 1st patriarch remained. Perhaps this battle is where I will perish, thought the noble Ran as he performed an incantation gesture, once again fighting back against his 2 Tao realm opponents. One of those opponents was a middle-aged man, the other was elderly. Their cultivation bases were at the same level as his, and they attacked with complete viciousness. They clearly wanted to kill the noble Ran more than anything else, and in response to his move, they unleashed their essence power, creating a huge mountain of ice, within which was sealed a black eyeball. As the mountain sped toward the noble Ran, it melted, creating a powerful blast of freezing air. Cracking sounds could be heard as everything froze over and was covered by layer after layer of frost. Simultaneously, the black eyeball flew out, becoming a black beam of light that shot toward the noble Ran. He laughed bitterly as the freezing ice spread out over his body, and the black beam of light closed in. Finally, he bit his tongue and spit out a glob of blood, which transformed into a blood mist that blocked the black light. Rumbling sounds could be heard, and a stubborn gleam appeared in the noble Ran's eyes. He took a deep breath and then said, "The Tao is in my heart." Instantly, the ice covering him cracked and then shattered away. The 2 Tao realm experts he was facing began to laugh coldly. "That move again. Noble Ran, we've fought back and forth numerous times, and this isn't the first time you've tried to use that Seal the Heavens incantation, and it never works. Anybody can see that it's a completely worthless incantation. The Seal the Heavens incantation is a complete joke. I've heard people say that you got it to work once, is that right? To tell you the truth, I really look forward to seeing that happen. I want to see this Seal the Heavens incantation that you supposedly used to block tens of thousands of opponents at the same time." The two Tao Realm experts continued to laugh coldly. Instead of unleashing attacks, they merely hovered there, looking at the noble Ran with cold cynicism. Their words stung, but the noble Ran's eyes gleamed with stubbornness. He had succeeded, albeit only once. However, that one time in which he had succeeded had given his apprentice the chance to escape. That one success was something he would never forget. The seal the heavens incantation is not worthless. The will is in my eyes, roared the noble Ran, then gritted his teeth as he assumed the proper pose to further mockery from his opponents. I shall possess the mountains and seas, seal the heavens incantation. The noble Ran threw his head back and roared, splaying both arms out wide and then waving them out. However, absolutely no magical technique appeared. The noble Ran's eyes faded, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. He chuckled bitterly, and yet deep inside he still believed that the seal the heavens incantation was not worthless. How many times have you tried to use that magic? Every single time you prove that it's a completely worthless incantation. What a pity, we've still never even seen this so-called seal the heavens incantation. The two cultivators from the seventh mountain and sea shook their heads and then began to speed toward the noble Ran, pulsing with killing intent. In his bitterness, the noble Ran slowly began to speak, more to himself than to anyone else. It's not a worthless incantation, it's the seal the heavens incantation, which I created myself. The seal the heavens incantation. I succeeded once before, he murmured. He had paid an unimaginable price to create the seal the heavens incantation, and the memories of what had occurred were something he didn't like to recall. It was an incredible pain that he kept hidden away deep in his heart. Rumble. As the two Tao Realm experts closed in, they joined forces to unleash a powerful magical technique. The image of a huge black centipede appeared, a vicious creature which opened its mouth as if to consume the noble Ran. Take your worthless incantation with you into death. However, it was at this point that an icy cold voice suddenly echoed out across the battlefield, exploding into the ears of the two Tao Realm cultivators. You people want to see the seal the heavens incantation. Well then, I'll give you that chance right now. The Tao is in my heart. As soon as the words, the Tao is in my heart, echoed out, massive rumbling filled heaven and earth and everything shook. At the same time, a shocking aura spread out to fill the starry sky. The two Tao Realm experts' faces fell. The voice from just now had pierced into their minds, causing them to tremble physically. They looked up into the starry sky and saw a figure approaching. That figure wore a long robe, and his descent caused the more than 1,000,000 fiercely fighting cultivators on the battlefield to be filled with shock. As for his words, they echoed about like the crash of thunder. This new arrival was none other than Meng Hao. When the noble Ran saw him, he began to tremble and his eyes filled with happiness. He began to laugh, and the look in his eyes turned to that of excitement. My little disciple, my little disciple. The will is in my eyes, Meng Hao said, which was the second line of the incantation. His voice echoed out, booming like thunder, causing the two Tao Realm experts from the seventh mountain and sea to cough up blood. Looks of shock and disbelief flashed across their faces. They weren't the only ones. The other Tao Realm experts in the area all looked over in astonishment. Of course, what was most shocking to them was not just the power of Meng Hao's voice, but the fact that all of a sudden, an indescribable pressure had begun to weigh down on them. That boundless pressure felt like an enormous mountain crushing down onto their backs. It was the power of the mountain and sea realm. The first patriarch of the righteous noble sect looked on in astonishment. The other Tao Realm experts on both sides of the battlefield felt their minds spinning. As for the chief Dharma protector of the Heaven God Society, when he recognized Meng Hao, he immediately gasped. However, the one who was most shocked wasn't him, it was the boy Zhao Yihan. He looked at Meng Hao with wide eyes for a moment before turning around and fleeing. That was the reaction of the Tao Realm experts. As for all of the other 1,000,000 or more cultivators on the battlefield, the power of the mountains and seas caused them to tremble and their minds to reel. Instantly, all of the fighting completely stopped, all because of a single person. I shall possess the mountains and seas, Meng Hao said, the third line of the incantation. The entire starry sky was filled with booming sounds like those of war drums, sounds that caused everyone present to be completely shaken. Their minds buzzed as the power of the mountain and sea realm seemed to become even stronger than before. It was as if massive power had built up and was now being released, creating a pressure that overwhelmed the minds of everyone present. It was a pressure that didn't just affect their cultivation bases. It actually caused everyone to stop breathing. Only the noble Ran was smiling. As for the two Dao realm opponents he had been fighting, their faces were ashen, and their minds spun out of control. The entire world, the entire starry sky, seemed to converge upon Meng Hao. They watched as Meng Hao spoke the third line, stretched his hands out wide, then waved them toward the starry sky, simultaneously speaking the final words of the incantation. Seal the heavens, incantation. Chapter 1291. Who said it was a worthless incantation? /expand. Rain began to fall in the starry sky. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to call it the tears of the mountains and seas. Tears for the battle, tears for the crumbled ruins, tears for the slaughter, tears because of the mutual destruction unleashed by the cultivators of the mountains and seas. The tears began to fall in the instant that Meng Hao said the final words of the incantation. They fell from the starry sky down onto the battlefield, splashing onto all the cultivators there. It was a gentle rain that seemed to contain no force whatsoever. The cultivators first stared in shock, but then began to relax. The pressure from moments ago had been shocking to the extreme, but in contrast, this rain seemed completely powerless. The Dao realm experts from the seventh mountain and sea, who had been so nervous moments ago, now had strange expressions on their faces. The two who had been fighting with the noble, Ran even chuckled. Seal the heavens incantation. This is the seal the heavens incantation. How droll, what an amusing magical technique. Their nervousness instantly began to fade away. After breathing sighs of relief, they then began to laugh loudly. However, they backed up nonetheless. Although they did not fear the seal the heavens incantation, the sudden addition of Meng Hao onto the battlefield was definitely fear-inspiring. The chief Dharma protector of the Heaven God Society sighed inwardly, and the other almighty Dao realm experts of the eighth mountain and sea looked on with grim expressions. There were only 3 people on the battlefield who had different reactions. One was Meng Hao, and another was the noble Ran. The noble Ran was laughing, a laughter filled with happiness and excitement. The third person who was acting completely differently was the boy Zhao Yihan, who was fleeing at top speed, and in a flash had exited the battlefield. Of everyone present, he understood Meng Hao the best and was completely terrified of him. As for Meng Hao, he was completely calm as he closed his eyes. The noble Ran's laughter continued to echo out as he too closed his eyes. The moment that master and apprentice closed their eyes, the entire starry sky began to shake. The falling rain then erupted with a power that could shake heaven and earth. As it surged out, the gentleness from before became a burning madness. It was as if the mountain and sea realm had suddenly gone from being incredibly sad to being exceedingly furious. It was furious that the living beings in the mountain and sea realm would slaughter each other, furious that the 33 heavens had completely sealed the mountain and sea realm. It was furious at anything and everything. Rumble! A raindrop exploded, bypassing the cultivators of the 8th mountain and sea to slam into the cultivators from the 7th mountain and sea. Their faces fell as the power of that raindrop's explosion hit them like a mountain. Argumembll. One raindrop after another began to explode, filling the battlefield with intense explosions. In the blink of an eye, the whole battlefield was collapsing as the boundless power of the mountains and seas erupted out violently. Blood-curdling screams rose up from the cultivators of the 7th mountain and sea, as nearly 1,000,000 cultivators coughed up huge mouthfuls of blood. That blood merged together into an entire sea of blood which swept out like floodwaters. Argumembll. Things weren't over yet. The explosions continued as all of the rain detonated. The power of the mountains and seas was thoroughly unleashed. It was like a giant roaring across the battlefield. Each time it waved its arms, blood sprayed from mouths and cultivators were sent spinning through the air. The Dao realm experts from the 7th mountain and sea wore expressions of shock. They could clearly sense the power of the mountains and seas, and could tell that it was incensed. What power is this? I can feel the rage of heaven and earth. This is shocking. Heaven and earth is furious. The mountain and sea realm is rejecting us. I can even sense my essence trembling. Cries of alarm rose up, filled with disbelief and astonishment. The Dao realm cultivators from the 7th mountain and sea were being suppressed by the will of the mountain and sea realm itself. Rumbling echoed out as blood sprayed out of their mouths, and they were sent tumbling through the air. This shocking scene played out all over the battlefield. Blood sprayed out of the mouths of all of the cultivators from the 7th mountain and sea, and they began to fall back, albeit not voluntarily. They were being shoved backward by a massive force. All across the battlefield, the cultivators of the Eighth Mountain and Sea looked on with gaping jaws. The chief Dharma protector of the Heaven God Society was astonished, and the first patriarch of the righteous noble sect was shocked. All of the Tao realm experts of the Eighth Mountain and Sea were aghast. That was not even to mention the other cultivators who were not in the Tao realm. Everyone was flabbergasted. This power, it's the power of the mountain and sea realm, the will of the mountains and seas. The Seal the Heavens incantation. The noble Rand Seal the Heavens incantation can actually control the entire mountain and sea realm. Looks of disbelief began to appear on the faces of the Tao realm cultivators of the Eighth Mountain and Sea. A huge gap now existed between the two sides on the battlefield. However, no one was killed. The cultivators of the Seventh Mountain and Sea were injured and shocked, and their cultivation bases were suppressed, but no one was killed. Even still, what was happening was completely astonishing. The two Tao realm experts who had been fighting the noble Ran were included in that. Their faces were masses of shock and fear, and when they felt the power of expulsion pushing against them, a deep sense of unease rose up in their hearts. Both of them felt as if they were under attack by some monstrous power, and were sent flying backward accompanied by intense, rumbling sounds. Even as they tumbled back, Meng Hao's eyes snapped open and they blazed with killing intent. Voice cool, he said, "As for you too, you shall die." It was not a request, it was a command uttered with extreme calm. The instant the words left his mouth, the two Tao realm experts screamed miserably as the power of the mountains and seas shredded them to bits. Blood and gore spattered out, and although their nascent divinities appeared and tried to flee, they were quickly destroyed by the power of the mountains and seas. Those two deaths caused the cultivators on both sides of the battlefield to gasp. Now that the two sides had been forcibly separated, everything went silent. The noble Ran opened his eyes, and a wide smile broke out on his face. That smile was one of happiness and contentment, and when he looked at Meng Hao, his eyes glowed with deep gratitude. Meng Hao looked around the battlefield, then slowly said, "Who said the Seal the Heavens incantation was a worthless incantation?" No one responded. Not a single cultivator dared to say a word. Everyone from both the Seventh Mountain and Sea and the Eighth was completely shaken, and when they looked at Meng Hao, it was with deep awe and dread. Anyone who could draw upon the power of the mountains and seas was someone completely terrifying. Someone like that was similar to the mountain and sea lords. They wielded power that ordinary people did not possess. Not even Tao sovereigns were awe-inspiring enough to command the power of the mountains and seas, not unless they became mountain and sea lords. Were it not for the fact that the Tao realm experts from the Seventh Mountain and Sea were sure that the Lord of the Eighth Mountain and Sea was slumbering and had not awoken, they would have believed Meng Hao to be the Lord of the Eighth Mountain and Sea. Meng Hao's gaze swept across the crowds, then came to rest on the noble Ran. Clasping hands, he bowed deeply. "Greetings, Master." "Wonderful, wonderful," the noble Ran said excitedly, laughing, but also staggering a bit from weakness and his internal injuries. Meng Hao hurried forward and held out an arm to help support him. As soon as he touched him, a gentle power sprang out from within Meng Hao and began to course through the noble Ran, healing his injuries. As of that moment, all eyes were on the noble Ran, and as for the cultivators from the Seventh Mountain and Sea, their expressions were those of dread. When the noble Ran felt his injuries healing rapidly, he looked at Meng Hao and mused that he really had made the right decision in taking him as an apprentice. In fact, for Meng Hao's sake, he had offended everyone in the entire Heaven God Alliance. "Master, I can't stay," Meng Hao said quietly. "There's an important matter I have to attend to. Master, please take this jade slip. If this mountain and sea is ever overrun by the enemy, please use it to borrow some of the power of the Seal the Heavens incantation. Go to the Ninth Mountain and Sea. That is my home." He handed the noble Ran a jade slip that could be used to pierce through the barriers between mountains and seas, one of several that he had made at the same time that he had set up the spell formation in the Meng clan. The noble Ran smiled kindly and nodded, accepting the jade slip. He looked very content as well as deeply proud. From this moment on, no one would ever dare to say that the Seal the Heavens incantation was a worthless incantation. Say that it was worthless was to say that the entire mountain and sea realm was worthless. Meng Hao once again clasped hands and bowed deeply to the noble Ran. Then he looked around at the surrounding cultivators and said, "Anyone who dares to harm my master, regardless of their status or the level of their cultivation base, will have their entire sect or clan exterminated by me." Everyone, both those from the seventh mountain and sea as well as those from the eighth, all heard him, and their hearts trembled. A threat from someone who was similar to a mountain and sea lord was a threat that even a Tao sovereign had to take seriously. Meng Hao once again clasped hands to the noble Ran, then made his way off the battlefield. The only reason he had come here was because of the noble Ran. He resolved the situation, healed his master's injuries, then said his parting words, certain that his master would now be safe regardless of what happened in the war. After Meng Hao left, neither side on the battlefield felt like fighting anymore, and gradually dispersed, faces filled with awe and other mixed emotions. This was the first time since the mountain and sea war began that a battle ended in such a way. News quickly spread among both sides, and soon everyone in the 8th and 7th mountains and seas were aware of how terrifying the seal the heavens incantation was. They learned of Meng Hao and also that there was someone else in the war who was not to be provoked, the noble Ran. No cultivators from the 7th mountain and sea dared to venture into the interior of the Heaven God Alliance. As for Meng Hao, he proceeded along through the starry sky, getting closer and closer to the 8th mountain. As he neared, it became more and more clear that the shocking fluctuations coming from the top of the 8th mountain were filled with a familiar aura. A few more hours passed, and Meng Hao arrived at the foot of the 8th mountain. Looking up toward the peak of the mountain, he murmured, "Sir, are you my grandpa Meng?" Chapter 1292, Are You, My Grandpa Meng? Chapter 1293, Storm Clouds Approach. Describing Meng Hao's thoughts at this moment would be a very difficult thing to do. He stood there silently at the foot of the 8th mountain for a long moment before taking a step forward and beginning to climb. Considering the level of his cultivation base, there was really nothing to cause him any hesitation. However, he couldn't stop thinking about how important this was, and how much he wanted his grandpa Meng to be at the top of the mountain. Although he had his suspicions, he still wondered why his grandfather had come to be the mountain and sea lord. Although in the end, that part wasn't really important. What was important was that his grandfather was still alive. Deep in the memories of his childhood, he could recall the images of both of his grandfathers, how they had cradled him in their arms, how they had smiled happily, and how they had even devolved into angry arguments over whose turn it was to hold him. Even more unforgettable was how his grandpa Meng and grandpa Fang had left together to search for a way to save him. After leaving, they never returned. Because of that, both of their bloodlines, which had once stood at the pinnacles of their respective clans, entered a state of decline. Meng Hao was deeply moved, but also felt very guilty. Therefore, even if he had to pay a heavier price than he already had, he would willingly do so to protect his grandma Meng and her people, and with no regrets at that. He had led the Fang clan to prominence, but as for the Meng clan, all he could do was protect them as best he could. "It might be you, it might not," he murmured. "I'll find out when I get there." After more time passed, he slowly began to walk up the 8th mountain. As he did, many memories swirled through his mind. This was one of the great 9 mountains, and it was actually the first time he had stepped onto one of them. It was huge, so huge that a mortal could spend a lifetime climbing it and never reach the top. In fact, even among cultivators, there were few people who could ever reach the true peak of the mountain. However, this proved to be no obstacle for Meng Hao. As he walked along, time passed, although he wasn't sure how much. Soon he was halfway up the mountain, where he saw the immortal ancient Taoist rite. It looked just like the immortal ancient Taoist rite on the 9th mountain, except that it was completely sealed, not by outside forces, but from the inside. Meng Hao looked at it and could sense that there were cultivators inside, including several extremely powerful auras. In the same moment that he was studying them, they were doing the same of him. A long moment passed, after which Meng Hao clasped hands and bowed. Then he proceeded along, slowly approaching the peak of the mountain. Eventually, he found himself standing in front of an enormous stone stele, upon which were written the words, "Heaven God Society." As he looked at the words, he could sense the archaic feeling of many years upon the stone stele, as if it had experienced a baptism of time. He passed the stele, whereupon he caught sight of a narrow path, a path that led to the peak of the mountain. It was a peaceful little path with no people on it. Not a sound could be heard anywhere. He followed the path until he saw a body of water that was like a celestial pond. Within that water was a statue of a Chunwu turtle. Actually, despite the fact that it looked like a statue, Meng Hao could tell that within that Chunwu turtle was a spark of life as well as the aura of the mountain and sea realm. In that moment, the demon sealing hexing magic inside of him trembled. Meng Hao felt almost as if something were calling to him. All of a sudden, the Xuanwu turtle opened its eyes and looked at him. One man, one turtle. As they looked at each other, Meng Hao's mind reeled. It was as if he was looking directly at the mountain and sea realm itself. A long moment passed, after which Meng Hao finally settled his thoughts. Then the Xuanwu turtle slowly bowed its head, indicating that it was offering him its allegiance. It was offering formal greetings, from the mountain and sea realm to its one and only lord. Past the celestial pond was a palace. It was not luxurious, but rather built into the mountain itself. The front gate was closed, and everything was quiet and peaceful. Meng Hao's gaze lingered on the Xuanwu turtle for a moment before he walked past it toward the palace. He stood quietly outside the gate for a moment, then raised his hand and pushed it open. No sound could be heard as the gate slowly swung open to reveal a modest hall, lined with rows of statues on either side, which were clad in black armor. Further up ahead on a huge throne, a person sat cross-legged. He wore armor and his face was covered. A majestic, boundless power flowed inside of him, something that exerted stifling pressure even on Meng Hao. The pressure was like a boundless force, an endless sea, quiet and yet profound. It was the type of power that, when it erupted out, could destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth. In addition to all that, Meng Hao was also able to sense the fluctuations of the mountain and sea realm itself. They were fluctuations that could topple mountains and drain seas, and were apparently capable of focusing the power of the mountains and seas into a pressure that could destroy anything and everything. Meng Hao stood outside the hall. He didn't set foot inside, but instead examined the armored figure who sat there cross-legged on the throne. Meng Hao's vision could pierce through the armor to see what was inside, the face of a very, very old man. The fluctuations Meng Hao felt were familiar, and so was that face. Furthermore, the command medallion in his bag of holding began to show strong signs that it was homing in on the man. All of Meng Hao's suspicions were now confirmed. Trembling with excitement, he was now sure that the person in front of him was none other than his grandpa Meng. "Grandpa," he said. Although he had been prepared for this outcome, it was hard to suppress his excitement. He had been hoping to find his two grandfathers for many years now, and at long last he had found one of them. After a long moment passed, Meng Hao took a deep breath, and his eyes glittered brightly. He could tell that there was something off about his grandfather. Although his cultivation base seemed to be alive and bursting with power, that was only the exterior. Inside, his true cultivation base wasn't even moving. Apparently, there was something about his grandfather which was missing, something that would normally be able to stir his cultivation base into motion. Apparently, this body's soul was sleeping. After another long moment passed, Meng Hao closed his eyes and sent some divine sense out into the hall, as well as the surrounding area. Soon, it had covered the entirety of the 8th mountain. Time passed. Finally, Meng Hao opened his eyes and they shone with a strange light. "His soul is gone," he murmured. It was a somewhat familiar situation. Soon, his eyes widened. "I experienced something like this in the desolation of delusion. Grandpa Meng's soul isn't in his body, it's somewhere outside. However, it still exists. From the look of it, there's only one explanation. Grandpa Meng's soul has merged into the 8th mountain and sea. His soul is everywhere. It's as if he took a mental journey through heaven and earth, but then forgot to return. No other person would be able to reach such a conclusion so quickly. However, Meng Hao was the type of person who could fight with mountain and sea lords. Because of his familiarity with the power of the mountains and seas, he was quickly able to detect the various clues. He thought back to the nails which had been stuck in his grandma Meng and the others, and everything he had experienced in the process of removing them. "Use the bloodline as the curse and the relatives as the spell," Meng Hao murmured. "Seal the soul, thus ensuring that it cannot find the path to return. The soul can only drift about in the 8th mountain and see as it gradually loses its consciousness, acting on instinct alone." A bitter expression appeared on his face, but after a moment his eyes began to shine. He clasped hands and bowed deeply to his grandfather, then closed the temple gate and left the 8th mountain. "I've already broken the bloodline curse," he murmured, floating through the starry sky, eyes shining brightly. "I've also ended the part of the curse cast by means of his relatives. Grandpa Meng now has what he needs to awaken. He just lacks a strong catalyst. If he has that, his soul will instinctively return to his body." He now had a new direction, the rift connecting the 7th mountain and sea to the 8th. There could be no stronger catalyst than the intense ripples which would result from a battle with another mountain and sea lord. If I really want to end the invasion of the 7th mountain and sea, then the simplest way to do so is to kill the Lord of the Seventh Mountain and Sea. As the saying goes, if you want to catch bandits, first catch their ringleader. If the Lord of the Seventh Mountain and Sea dies, then the war will be over. With every sentence that Meng Hao uttered, the look in his eyes grew sharper. The Lord of the Seventh Mountain and Sea, he said, his eyes gleaming with decisiveness. With that, he took another step forward and then vanished. When he reappeared, he was outside of the Heaven God Alliance, near the border between the Eighth and Seventh Mountains and Seas. That was where the rift was. The Seventh Mountain and Sea had already heavily fortified the area with hundreds of thousands of cultivators and countless spell formations. In fact, there were actually 4 Dao Realm experts stationed in the area. One of them was just as famous as Marquis Lu had been in the Seventh Mountain and Sea. He was also a Dao sovereign, Patriarch Kai Yan. Of the other 3, one was a Dao lord, and the other 2 were Essence Dao Realm experts. With those 4 in place, along with hundreds of thousands of other cultivators and countless restrictive spells and other spell formations, it had become a place that no cultivator of the Eighth Mountain and Sea would be able to breach easily. Furthermore, if someone tried to break through the defenses, but didn't succeed quickly, then the rest of the main army that was currently invading the Heaven God Alliance, as well as numerous other almighty experts, would surely hasten back to flank them. However, Meng Hao was not just any cultivator. As soon as he appeared in the area, he did nothing to disguise the fluctuations of his cultivation base. He circulated his ancient mana to explosive effect, and even sent the aura of the Paragon Bridge emanating out. The power of the mountains and seas swirled around him, causing a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering tempest to spring up. As the tempest spread out, the starry sky distorted, and a boundless sea of stars appeared. It was an explosive power that could topple mountains and drain seas, causing the sky to grow dim and massive rumbling to rise up. Instantly, the cultivators from the Seventh Mountain and Sea awoke from their meditative trances, and their expressions flickered. At the same time, a powerful roar echoed out from the region of the rift. "Who goes there?" The sound echoed out like thunder as a red-haired old man appeared. When his eyes opened, they looked completely bizarre. Each eye had 2 pupils. Behind him was a pitch-black ox, fully 3,000 meters tall. Almost instantly, its eyes blazed with the fire of the underworld as it stared at Meng Hao. Strangely, the fire that burned within the eyes of that pitch-black ox seemed to also burn within the dual pupils of the red-haired old man. The result was that anyone who looked at either the old man's eyes or the ox's would suddenly feel their vision swimming. 3 other old men sat off to the side, and when their eyes opened, the essence aura of the Dao realm erupted from them. As Meng Hao approached, he looked around at the hundreds of thousands of cultivators, then looked at the red-haired old man and calmly said, "I'm not interested in slaughtering more wrongdoers. Send these other cultivators away." Chapter 1294, I'm waiting for you. As soon as the red-haired old man's gaze met Meng Hao's, the man's mind reeled, and an intense sensation of deadly crisis exploded up inside of him, as though a voice was screaming inside of him. The sensation of crisis caused the old man to begin to tremble. He felt almost as if he were facing the Lord of the Seventh Mountain and Sea. Although he seemed calm beneath the surface, he was terrified. The red-haired old man's dual pupils constricted, and he immediately waved his hand dismissively. "Withdraw," he said. That single word caused all of the cultivators from the Seventh Mountain and Sea to be filled with shock. They began to back up, opening up a path in front of Meng Hao. The old man frowned, then barked, "I said to withdraw." His voice echoed out like thunder into the ears of the hundreds of thousands of cultivators, whose minds spun. Almost immediately, they began to scatter away from the region of the rift. The other 3 Dao Realm experts frowned in response to the red-haired old man's words. "Patriarch Kai, this isn't very appropriate," said the almighty Dao Lord. "Shut your mouth," the old man roared. "I don't need you criticizing my orders." He leveled a glare at the Dao Lord, then turned towards the rest of the cultivators and frowned again. "Withdraw further. Get 5,000 kilometers away from here. Without my authorization, none of you are to set foot into this area. Go now." The booming of the old man's voice echoed within the minds of the hundreds of thousands of cultivators. They had no way to sense how terrifying Meng Hao was, but they could not afford to disregard the orders of the red-haired old man. Soon, the hundreds of thousands of cultivators were in full flight. Soon, that 5,000-kilometer area around the rift was completely empty except for the 4 Dao Realm experts, the leader of whom was the red-haired old man. The old man stared at Meng Hao as he slowly rose to his feet. His condescending manner caused the Tao Lord he had just rebuked to snort coldly, and his eyes to flicker with venomous hatred. However, the Tao Lord wasn't in the mood to get into an altercation, so he said nothing. But then, he looked more closely at Meng Hao, and just like the red-haired old man, he could sense the terrifying fluctuations hidden within him, and his eyes went wide. The other 2-1 Essence Tao Realm cultivators' expressions also became serious. As soon as the red-haired old man rose to his feet, they also stood up, gathering the power of their cultivation bases to summon various magical techniques and items as if they were facing up against a mighty opponent. Meng Hao's expression was calm as he looked over this red-haired old man. The old man had complied with Meng Hao's wishes to send the hundreds of thousands of cultivators away, which left Meng Hao with a somewhat favorable impression of him. He could tell that some level of benevolence existed within his heart, and that he realized having all of the other cultivators around when they were fighting would do little good. In the end, those hundreds of thousands of cultivators would definitely end up being killed or simply fleeing. Allowing them to leave now was actually the best way to keep the forces of the 7th Mountain and Sea at top strength. The red-haired old man looked at Meng Hao, his heart full of caution, then asked, "Who are you, Your Excellency?" Meng Hao was the calm response as he walked forward. Almost immediately, the spell formations and restrictive spells burst out loudly, filling the area with brilliant light as they were completely activated. However, in that exact moment, booms rang out as the restrictive spells collapsed, and the spell formations exploded in brilliant flashes of light. As Meng Hao advanced, all of the restrictive spells and spell formations were destroyed. It was as if the mere pressure and energy coming off of Meng Hao turned into a power that could counteract anything, could crush all resistance like dried weeds. The red-haired old man's face fell, and the eyes of the Tao Lord next to him went wide. The other 2-1 Essence Tao Realm experts felt their hearts beating out of control. All of this takes some time to describe, but actually happened in the briefest instant. As the heaven-shaking, earth-shattering roaring booms filled the area around the rift, a blinding light spread out in all directions that seemed bright enough to light up the entire starry sky. When that light faded away, it almost seemed as if the previously glorious light of the starry sky was now gone. The only thing left behind were ripples that spread out into the distance, filling a 5,000-kilometer area. As of this moment, all of the spell formations in the area had been completely destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of cultivators outside of the 5,000-kilometer area could sense what had happened, and their minds filled with shock. That was especially true of the ancient realm experts. Despite having left the area, their divine sense enabled them to observe what was happening, and when they saw Meng Hao simply take a few steps and use the pressure emanating from him to destroy all of the spell formations, their minds filled with raging waves of shock. What cultivation base is that? Tao Realm, and definitely not an ordinary Tao Realm cultivation base. Everyone was astonished, and the 4 Tao Realm experts' hearts were pounding. Accompanied by ear-splitting booms that caused everything to grow dark, Meng Hao suddenly appeared only 300 meters in front of the group of 4. However, he didn't stop there. He continued to advance casually, not even looking at the red-haired old man or the others. Instead, he was staring at the rift which had been torn open in the starry sky and the beast which was still holding the rift open. That beast did not look like it once had when it had pried the rift open. It had transformed into creeping vines which covered both sides of the rift, preventing it from closing up. As Meng Hao got closer to the rift, he could sense an astonishing life force approaching, getting nearer and nearer. He could tell that it wouldn't be very long before that life force reached the rift and stepped into the 8th Mountain and Sea. As Meng Hao neared the rift, the steps he took didn't appear out of the ordinary, and yet the red-haired old man and the others could sense a terrifying rumbling. The level of terror they felt increased with each step, and the booms grew louder. The 1 Essence Tao Realm experts' faces were ashen, and blood began to ooze out of their mouths. Their expressions were those of complete terror as they were forced to step back in retreat. Next was the Tao Lord, who also began to fall back, and finally the red-haired old man. They had no choice but to do so. As Meng Hao got closer, it felt to them as if a massive millstone was approaching, and if they didn't fall back, they would be destroyed, crushed into nothing but paste. Rumble! Meng Hao slowly advanced, and the group of 4 fell back again. Next, the Tao Lord began to bleed from the mouth. When Meng Hao was about 150 meters away, the pressure was so intense, and their fear so great, that it was as if all the heavens were bearing down on them. Cracks began to echo out from inside the bodies of the One Essence Tao Realm cultivators as they began to fall apart. The Tao Lord's face was now magenta, and his blood could hardly flow through his veins. The red-haired old man was trembling, and to him it felt as if he were standing within the shadow of death. They let out powerful roars, and their eyes filled with looks of madness. They knew that if they didn't do something about this pressure, then they would soon lose any ability to resist it, and if Meng Hao took even a few more steps, they would be crushed to death. The red-haired old man threw his head back and roared, fully rotating his cultivation base. Rumbling booms could be heard as he transformed into a beam of light that shot toward Meng Hao. His hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture, and a bizarre light shone from his pupils, causing the void ahead of him to distort. The pitch-black ox also threw its head back and bellowed, lowering its head to charge Meng Hao with its horns. It was a spectacular and shocking scene. As of this moment, the red-haired old man's cultivation base was bursting with power. He waved his hand, causing essence power to surge out. 4 streams of essence could be seen: wind, rain, thunder, and lightning. The wind was like a storm, the rain was the essence of water, the thunder was a roar, and the lightning crackled and danced. The 4 streams of essence formed into the pattern of a spell formation which could shake heaven and earth. The old man was the type to either not attack, or attack with his most powerful Taos. In addition to what he had already done, all of a sudden, his hair suddenly flew out, transforming into a crimson sea which covered the entire area. It rapidly became a blood mist, which was the essence the old man was currently exploring, his 5th essence. Although he hadn't completed the process, it still bolstered the power of his other essences. Behind him, the Tao Lord trembled in madness, performing an incantation gesture to unleash a divine ability. A beam of light shot toward Meng Hao at incredible speed, piercing through the starry sky. Simultaneously, the image of numerous sword projections became visible around the Tao Lord. Almost in the blink of an eye, there were more than 10,000 of them. His murderous aura was so strong that everything shook violently. Shockingly, behind each sword projection was a vicious spirit, which propelled the swords toward Meng Hao, making it seem as if Meng Hao was not facing one opponent, but rather 10,000 sword cultivators. Last were the 2 One Essence cultivators. Their cultivation bases were relatively limited, and because of the pressure from Meng Hao, they paid the steepest price of the group. Blood sprayed out of their mouths, their eyes were bloodshot, and their jaws were tightly clenched. Neither of them had more than 1 essence, but even still, they combined their power to produce the image of a sun. Meng Hao looked at his 4 opponents, and then stepped down with his right foot. When he did, he passed the 30-meter mark to appear directly in front of the group. As he stepped down, the starry sky rumbled, and an astonishing power exploded out from him. His right hand reached out to tap one of the pitch-black ox's horns. The ox let out a miserable shriek and collapsed into pieces. At the same time, the wave of Meng Hao's hand caused the red-haired old man's essences to be obliterated. Blood sprayed out of his mouth, and he was sent spinning away. Meng Hao turned, snorting coldly. The sound echoed out, slamming into the 10,000 sword projections, shattering them. The sword cultivator Tao Lord coughed up a mouthful of blood and was already on the point of being killed, all by a mere snort. He instantly fell back. As for the 2 One Essence Tao Realm cultivators, all it took was a mere look from Meng Hao. His gaze was like a sword that shattered their sun image and left them coughing up blood and fleeing in retreat. "Considering none of you have outsider totem tattoos, I won't kill you," he said coolly. Then he was in front of the rift. The red-haired old man and the others were completely shaken and were now looking at Meng Hao with unmitigated awe. Ignoring them, Meng Hao looked at the rift, eyes glittering. Then he sat down cross-legged. "I'm waiting for you," he said calmly. The only response was an icy cold harumph, echoing out slowly from within the rift. Chapter 1295. The Lord of the 7th Mountain and Sea arrives. Meng Hao sat down cross-legged outside the enormous rift, waiting for the Lord of the 7th Mountain and Sea to arrive. For Meng Hao, this coming battle would be a true test of his battle prowess. The person he wished to fight was one of the lords of the 9 mountains and seas, someone that countless cultivators viewed with awe. He was the mountain and sea lord of the 7th mountain and sea, and although he might not be the absolute most powerful among the mountain and sea lords, he was still incredibly strong. To Meng Hao, this would be a very important fight, considering that it was critical to helping his grandpa Meng awaken from slumber. It was also key to ending the mountain and sea war. If he could defeat the lord of the 7th mountain and sea in battle, then the war with the 8th mountain and sea would be over. Meng Hao wasn't completely confident in being able to win. His current battle prowess was equivalent to the 5 essences level, and his divine sense was even beyond that. However, he would be facing a mountain and sea lord. Although his opponent would also be at the 5 essences level, in terms of experience and cultivation, anyone with the status of mountain and sea lord was years beyond Meng Hao. Within his realm, he was essentially invincible when fighting anyone other than other mountain and sea lords. Furthermore, his 5 essences would surely be extraordinary, the type that could send the entire world into darkness upon their unleashing. Even though Meng Hao had already extinguished his first soul lamp, he still wasn't completely confident that he could win. After all, the 9 mountain and sea lords were the most esteemed entities within the entire mountain and sea realm. To become a mountain and sea lord, one had to experience endless slaughter and conquer countless enemies. It was a long path of fighting and struggle to secure the position of being the lord of one of the great mountains and seas. But I still want to meet this powerful expert and fight him. Meng Hao's eyes burned with the desire to do battle. Taking a deep breath, he slowly brought his urge to fight under control, then closed his eyes and calmed his heart. The time had come to focus his energy. That focusing of energy ensured that not a single ripple of power emanated out from him. Days began to pass. On the first day, a muffled rumbling sound began to echo out from within the rift, causing the entire starry sky to distort briefly. Meng Hao didn't open his eyes, but his heart thumped a bit faster for a moment before finally calming down. On the second day, the muffled rumbling turned into 5 distinct booms. On the third day, those booming sounds rang out more than 10 times. Meng Hao grew calmer, until even the sound of his heartbeat faded away from his consciousness. It was as if strength built upon strength, and the booming sounds were like a gentle breeze brushing against a towering mountain. 1. The last line in this paragraph is a huge nod to Jin Yang, the father of wuxia novels. It's actually a mnemonic from the Ning Yang Manual, a powerful martial arts manual in the Jin Yang universe. If you haven't read the Condor trilogy, you should put it on your reading list. It should be considered part of the Old Testament for wuxia fans. On the 7th day, the booming rang out ceaselessly. The starry sky outside of the rift was completely twisted and distorted, except for the portion where Meng Hao sat, which didn't seem to be affected. The red-haired old man and his fellows, who were still there in the area surrounding the rift, did not leave. They remained several thousand meters away, sitting cross-legged, watching the scene play out. As the 7 days went by, the anticipation in their hearts rose, and they began to breathe heavily. After witnessing Meng Hao's terrifying level of power, they had the deep desire to watch this coming battle. It didn't matter whether Meng Hao won or lost in the end. In the cultivation world, the law of the jungle prevailed, so any cultivator who dared to challenge a mountain and sea lord to battle was a person deserving of deep respect. Even the fact that they were enemies could not suppress the respect, and all that came from meeting someone truly powerful. Further off in the distance were the hundreds of thousands of cultivators from the 7th mountain and sea. They had set up camp there, nervous, but also unwilling to leave. They were all waiting for the lord of the 7th mountain and sea to emerge from the rift. Meng Hao's expression was completely calm, and he almost didn't seem to be breathing. His energy was completely focused inward, without the slightest bit leaking out. It was almost as if he had become one with the starry sky. He was so calm that it was almost impossible to detect his existence. The thunder-like booms that shook the heavens didn't seem to affect him at all. He was so calm that he was like a still, waveless sea in a painting. He was simply waiting for the wind and storms to arrive, like a volcano preparing to erupt. A massive pressure gradually filled the area around the rift, growing more intense. The pulsing frequency increased, and eventually it became clear that the two opponents were a counterpoint and foil to each other. One embodied action, the other embodied calm. Such action could shatter the highest heavens. Such calm was the stillness of a world in ruins. Another day passed, and the sounds emanating from the rift grew even more intense. At the same time, Meng Hao became so still and calm that not a single trace of his aura was detectable. It was at this point that, amidst the intense rumbling sounds, a tall and imposing figure appeared within the rift. It was a middle-aged man wearing a long white robe. His hair floated around him, and he looked threatening without being angry. His clothing seemed simple, and yet anyone who looked at him would be able to tell that he commanded supreme and ultimate respect. He walked as if strolling, and yet every step he took caused countless booming sounds to echo out. It was as if his cultivation base was so powerful that, as he walked, he destroyed all obstacles in his path. His simple footfalls were the source of all the incredible booming sounds during the past days. Almost as soon as he appeared within that enormous rift, intense pressure radiated out, sweeping across everything. The rift trembled and opened wider. Ripples tore through the starry sky, ripping it up layer by layer. Several thousand meters away, the red-haired old man and his fellows all backed up, faces flickering as they clasped hands and bowed. "We offer respectful greetings upon your arrival, Lord White." Further off in the distance, the hundreds of thousands of cultivators were getting very excited, and they too clasped their hands and bowed in the direction of the rift. "We offer respectful greetings upon your arrival, Lord White." The 9th mountain had Lord Jai, the 8th mountain had Heaven God, the 7th mountain had Lord White, Sima Dao. The voices of all the cultivators joined together, creating a powerful sound wave that shook heaven and earth. That, combined with the pressure radiating off of the white-robed man, caused the entire 8th mountain and sea to shake. Meng Hao, of course, was the main focus, but as the pressure crushed down onto him, his eyes remained closed and unmoving. If you likened that boundless energy to pounding waves on a raging sea, then Meng Hao was a reef within that sea, remaining completely motionless regardless of how the sea howled. If you likened the pressure coming from the Lord of the 7th mountain and sea to a wild tempest, then Meng Hao was a quiet, unmoving mountain in the midst of the wind. At the same time, in the temple atop the 8th mountain, the masked Lord of the 8th mountain and sea suddenly trembled, as if a catalyzing force had suddenly prodded him. It was as if his consciousness was now beginning to converge in the area, and he was attempting to awaken. The entire 8th mountain and sea was shaken, except for Meng Hao. His aura, his soul, everything about him was completely focused inwardly. He was as calm as placid waters, and was still like a motionless sea in a painting. The Lord of the 7th mountain and sea was still inside the rift, and the two of them had not officially met, and yet they had already used the clashing of their dispositions as their first skirmish. A cold snort echoed out from the rift as Lord White suddenly lifted his right foot and then stepped out of the rift. The intense pressure weighing down on the 8th mountain and sea caused everything to shake. The starry sky twisted and numerous planets trembled. Back on the 8th mountain, the Lord of the 8th mountain and sea trembled, this time more intensely than before. A calm voice then echoed out from within the rift to spread out through the entire 8th mountain and sea. "You are the first person to ever dare to stand in my way." It was in that moment that his foot stepped completely out from the rift, placing Lord White halfway into the 8th mountain and sea. Despite only being halfway through the rift, the starry sky was trembling so violently, it seemed it might collapse because of the power of the mountains and seas that was erupting off of Lord White. As the starry sky shook, the cultivators of the 8th mountain and sea on all of the Heaven God Alliance's battlefields felt blood oozing out of the corners of their mouths. Their faces flickered, and regardless of their specific locations, they could sense the explosive pressure coming from above. It was like a mountain, crushing down, making it difficult for them to even rotate their cultivation bases. It was exactly the opposite with the cultivators of the 7th mountain and sea. Their faces lit up, and they could sense, not pressure, but power coming down from the starry sky above and melding into their bodies. Instantly, their battle prowess began to increase. "Lord White has come. We offer respectful greetings upon your arrival, Lord White." "We offer respectful greetings, Lord White." "The 7th mountain and sea is definitely going to win the war. Lord White is here." The cultivators of the 7th mountain and sea were shouting in excitement, causing their voices to echo out across the battlefields in the Heaven God Alliance. In comparison, the cultivators of the 8th mountain and sea felt their energy waning rapidly. Now that they were facing cultivators from the 7th mountain and sea whose energy was rocketing up, their faces went pale, and they subconsciously began to back up. Almost instantly, the 8th mountain and sea cultivators were in a position to be completely rooted on numerous fronts. "And you will be the last," continued the Lord of the 7th mountain and sea, his voice grim as he completely stepped out from within the rift. Lord White, several thousand meters away, the red-haired old man and the other Dao Realm experts all clasped hands and bowed, their eyes shining with excitement. "Lord White," roared the hundreds of thousands of cultivators off in the distance. "Lord White," shouted all of the cultivators from the 7th mountain and sea. Rumble. Although the cultivators of the 8th mountain and sea could not actually see the arrival of the Lord of the 7th mountain and sea, their hearts were trembling. Rumble. On the 8th mountain, the Lord of the 8th mountain and sea in the palace was now shaking continuously, and it seemed as if the eyes beneath his mask might open at any moment. Rumble! Meng Hao's eyes suddenly snapped open, and suddenly, what had been the placid image of a sea in a painting transformed into a violently erupting volcano. That will to fight which had lurked deep inside of him exploded out, causing colors to flash in the sky, and the starry sky to fill with rumbling sounds. Numerous layers of ripples instantly shot out to fill the entire eighth mountain and sea. Meng Hao's willpower, his energy, his everything, all merged into an indescribable pressure that crushed down toward the Lord of the seventh mountain and sea. So you're the Lord of the seventh mountain and sea. I've been waiting for you for quite a long time. The Lord of the seventh mountain and sea's eyes widened. The volcanic pressure which erupted from the formerly completely calm Meng Hao caused Lord White's energy to falter a bit, as if he had suddenly met his match. Massive rumbling rose up between the two, and the starry sky seemed to be on the verge of being torn apart. All of a sudden, the cultivators of the eighth mountain and sea who had been backing up just now felt much more relaxed, and their excitement began to build. Chapter 1296, Th8 Spear. Is that the mountain and sea lord, Heaven God? That's definitely him. Only Heaven God would have the energy to sweep across the eighth mountain and sea like that. All of the cultivators from the eighth mountain and sea were getting very excited. Moments before, the feeling of being suppressed by the Lord of the seventh mountain and sea had overwhelmed them, but now that feeling was gone. However, despite all of the excitement, the chief Dharma protector of the Heaven God Society, as well as the other Tao lords in the eighth mountain and sea, were all completely shaken. Looks of bewilderment could be seen on their faces as they looked out into the starry sky at the source of the ripples that everyone else assumed to be coming from their mountain and sea lord. That's not the exalted Heaven God, thought the chief Dharma protector, his heart trembling. He could sense that Heaven God was currently on the eighth mountain and was still slumbering. In fact, all of the other Tao lords of the eighth mountain and sea all had similar sensations. If he's not the exalted Heaven God then, who is he? That was the question running through the minds of the chief Dharma protector and the other Tao lords. Then they all began to tremble as a certain person popped into their heads. It was someone who had unleashed a shocking Taoist magic in battle recently, clearing the entire battlefield. Meng Hao, said the chief Dharma protector, gasping. As soon as the name left his mouth, his heart filled with mixed emotions. As of this moment, he was certain that the person emanating an energy similar to that of a mountain and sea lord was none other than Meng Hao. The cultivators of the eighth mountain and sea were filled with excitement, but those from the seventh mountain and sea were completely shocked. The huge disparity in their energy from moments ago was now gone, and very quickly the fighting resumed. However, the fighting that did go on was not very intense. No one seemed to be very interested in fighting at the moment, and the fact that the battlefield had calmed down gave everyone a chance to focus their attention on that location off in the distance, where a fight was about to begin that would determine the fate of two of the great mountains and seas. It was a battle of mountain and sea lords. If Lord White was defeated, then the tide of battle would completely turn in favor of the eighth mountain and sea. If the Lord of the seventh mountain and sea was actually killed, then the cultivators from that mountain and sea would be decimated, and the seventh mountain and sea would suffer an unrecoverable loss. However, if Lord White won, then the eighth mountain and sea would no longer exist. Everyone was waiting to see how this battle would play out. Rumble! Outside of the rift, Meng Hao's energy skyrocketed. The Paragon Bridge inside of him surged madly, and his cultivation base surged into rotation. His soul lamps flew out, his aura radiated out, and the power of his divine sense caused the starry sky to shake. And then he took a step forward. That step was like the eruption of a volcano. Meng Hao's energy solidified around him, forming something like an impregnable wall which then crushed out toward Lord White. Lord White stared at Meng Hao with a strange light gleaming in his eyes. His expression was not the least bit contemptuous, and in fact, he felt the situation to be a grave one. He could tell that Meng Hao was an incredible threat to him. Seeing that manifestation of Meng Hao's energy speeding toward him, Lord White waved his hand, causing blinding white light to spill out, subsequently transforming into 1,000,000 sword projections, which proceeded to pierce out in all directions. Massive rumbling sounds echoed out as Meng Hao's converged energy was stabbed through countless times, and then collapsed. In the middle of that collapse, Lord White strode forward, waving his finger toward Meng Hao, sending the 1,000,000 sword lights flowing toward him like a rumbling river. From a distance, It looked like a river of stars sweeping along with the power to destroy entire worlds. Shockingly, each beam of sword light contained terrifyingly destructive Tao realm power that, when combined together, caused wild colors to flash in the starry sky. Meng Hao's pupils constricted, and yet he didn't back up. Instead, he took another step forward, clenching his hand into a fist and unleashing a punch. It was none other than the life extermination fist. The starlight shattered and the sword beams distorted. Meng Hao's punch created an enormous vortex which rumbled as it spun, destroying the sword lights. From a distance, it seemed that the flow of that starry river had suddenly been obstructed. However, things weren't over yet. Meng Hao took a third step, unleashing the bedevilment fist. It was as if one willingly underwent bedevilment, a complete and eternal descent into madness. The bedevilment fist was backed by Meng Hao's energy and determination, smashing into the remaining sword lights, causing intense rumbling to rise up as more than half of them were completely shattered. Meng Hao's eyes gleamed as he took a fourth step, and the god-slaying fist made its appearance. The will of the god-slaying fist could merge with heaven and earth and fuse into the starry sky, converging the power of one's fleshly body. A cultivators with an indestructible all-heaven cultivation base could thus destroy the heavens, extinguish the earth, as a god of slaying. The starry sky shuddered and began to be torn apart layer by layer. The remaining sword lights shuddered, and then were shoved backward toward Lord White as if by some mad wind. Meng Hao's eyes flickered with killing intent. Without a moment's hesitation, he took a fifth step, performing an incantation gesture with his right hand that caused the blood demon to appear, and lunged toward Lord White with gaping maw. Lord White's pupils constricted. Snorting coldly, he said, "Interesting. You deserve for me to take you a bit seriously." Next, he performed an incantation gesture with his right hand, then pushed down onto his chest. In conjunction with the pressing down, icy coldness appeared all around him, along with an aura of essence. However, this was not the essence of ice, it was something else, something that could influence the power of essence belonging to others. It was emotionless extermination. The key to being emotionless was to extinguish the 7 emotions and 6 pleasures, to make oneself as cold as ice, and transform that into a will of extermination. As the finger waved through the air, Meng Hao shuddered as all of his blood suddenly iced up. Lord White's finger seemed to press down onto Meng Hao's soul, to wipe away all of his emotions. Family love, friendship, romantic love. In an instant, they seemed to be peeled away, separated from him, as if they were about to vanish. Meng Hao threw his head back and roared, causing a boundless light to shine off of him. The Paragon Bridge suddenly exploded out into the open, becoming a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering bridge that emanated an intense, archaic air. As soon as the bridge appeared, everything began to shake, and Lord White's essence of emotionless extermination suddenly grew still. In that brief moment, Meng Hao's eyes glittered with coldness, and he shuddered. His starstone melted, and he transformed into a meteor, the manifestation of none other than the one-thought stellar transformation. Instantly, he swept out toward Lord White with incredible speed. He was trying to clinch the victory right now. In the blink of an eye, he was closing with an explosive power that caused Lord White's brow to furrow. Then, Lord White extended his right hand and pushed out into the air. The power of his Peak 5 Essence's cultivation base converged into a huge palm that rumbled through the air toward the meteor, and then grabbed down onto it. The clenching hand seemed like it could even crush a planet within its grasp, and cracking sounds could be heard as fissures spread out across the meteor's surface. However, before it could get any closer to Lord White, when it was still over 100 meters away, it suddenly exploded. In its place appeared an azure streak of light, moving with indescribable speed out from the rubble of the meteor. As it pierced through the enormous hand, it became clear that it was a huge azure rock. In the blink of an eye, Meng Hao was almost directly in front of Lord White, bearing claws that were sharp enough to slice metal and shatter rock. Even as he slashed out with his claws, the mountain-consuming incantation summoned numerous huge mountains which crushed down from above. That still wasn't enough, though. Shockingly, a long spear suddenly appeared next to Meng Hao in azure rock form. That spear was the same spear that greed had unsealed, with the world tree haft and the dragon tip. That spear rumbled through the air, directly toward Lord White's forehead. All of this takes quite some time to describe, but actually took place in the time it takes a spark to fly off of a piece of flint. Normally speaking, considering the level of the cultivation bases involved, a fight between Meng Hao and Lord White could last for months or even years. After all, this level of fighting was rarely seen in the mountain and sea realm, and there was even the likelihood that the entire Eighth Mountain could be destroyed in the process. However, assuming one party was willing to go all out, then the length of the fight could be shortened drastically. Right now, the person going all out was Meng Hao. The situation was one in which Lord White assumed that he wouldn't do such a thing, wouldn't risk his life so blithely, yet that was exactly what he did. Not even Lord White could have guessed that this would happen. He frowned, and killing intent slowly filled his eyes. However, there was no time to ponder the matter. He immediately waved his right hand, causing his 5 fingernails to shatter and form into 5 crescent moons, which radiated a shocking curse power as they shot toward Meng Hao. Rumbling filled the starry sky as Meng Hao's mountain-consuming incantation collapsed. The Paragon Bridge began to shake, and his azure rock form's claws collapsed. Even as blood and gore spattered about, Meng Hao appeared and grabbed onto the spear. Then, the speed of the spear increased dramatically, and the tip stabbed toward Lord White's forehead until it was only about 7 inches away. Lord White's eyes widened as an intense sensation of deadly crisis rose up within him. He opened his mouth and roared, a shocking sound which instantly caused a huge illusory projection to appear behind him, which was also roaring at Meng Hao. The power was like a tempest, causing all light to dim. The dragon on Meng Hao's long spear roared, but compared to the giant, it was weak. Lord White's roar caused the spear to begin to shatter, and within moments, it was nothing more than ash. Too weak, Lord White said coolly, although inwardly his heart was pounding with anxiety. It was in that instant that the spear in Meng Hao's hand trembled. Demon weapon Lonlatum, Meng Hao said. Rumble. The collapse of the spear revealed that there was actually another spear hidden inside of it. That spear was pitch black and seemed to be congealed from numerous souls. It was demon weapon Lonlatum, a precious treasure that was unique to the demon sealers. As soon as the spear appeared, Meng Hao's energy surged, and the spear shot onward toward Lord White's forehead. Everything so far had been connected. First was his explosive opening attack, then his near death, the collapse of the meteor, the destruction of the mountains, the dispersal of the dragon spear. Apparently, all of that had been building up to this spear attack. Lord White's face completely fell. Chapter 1297, An Extraordinary Showdown. Everything had happened in the briefest of moments. Lord White, Lord of the 7th Mountain and Sea, with a Peak 5 Essences cultivation base, had experienced untold slaughter, but he could never have imagined that Meng Hao would be so ruthless. Meng Hao had attacked him over and over again, allowing himself to be wounded, his starstone to be shattered, his azure rock to be destroyed, and he himself to suffer serious internal injuries to the point where blood oozed out of the corners of his mouth. All of that was simply for the chance to unleash this shocking spear. Meng Hao hadn't hesitated at all to be wounded for that chance, and that was because he understood the gap that existed between himself and Lord White. Although that gap wasn't huge, to cultivators of this level, it was the type of thing that could mean the difference between victory and defeat, between life and death. And what Meng Hao wanted was not just victory or defeat, but rather, to kill his opponent and come out alive. It had nothing to do with enmity or hatred. The only way to end the war was to kill Lord White. With him dead, Grandpa Meng would be safe. Furthermore, the explosive ripples that would be unleashed prior to his death were exactly what was needed to bring his grandfather's soul back. Therefore, he chose to use this spear. In fact, Meng Hao's personality was such that he didn't even hesitate to waste the precious spear that had been unsealed by greed. The destruction of that spear had been the feint needed to unleash demon weapon Lonlatum, which now shot directly toward Lord White's forehead, bursting with power. Lord White had no time to react or even do anything before. The spear stabbed directly into his flesh. A ripping sound could be heard as his flesh was torn apart, and then cracking sounds echoed out as his skull was shattered. Demon weapon Lonlatum stabbed directly into Lord White's forehead. However, as that happened, no look of relief appeared on Meng Hao's face. Instead, his expression flickered and his pupils constricted. That was because, even as Lord White's forehead was pierced and his eyes dimmed, he suddenly spoke. Green Emperor's eternal incantation. In the same moment that the words left his mouth, an aura erupted out of him that Meng Hao found very familiar. Unexpectedly, it resembled the aura of the eternal stratum. As that aura erupted out, the flesh on Lord White's forehead began to wriggle. Simultaneously, that aura spread out into demon weapon Lonlatum and then toward Meng Hao. To Lord White, the aura was a restorative power, but to Meng Hao, it was like a surging wild beast. At the same time, his own eternal stratum roared madly. Apparently, these two different auras were as incompatible as water and fire. After all, Meng Hao's eternal stratum had been acquired by walking the road of perfection to the very end. Then, through a series of chance occurrences, he had managed to merge it with the eyeless larva. However, in the most fundamental of ways, it actually had some connections to the mountain and sea scripture. Just as Meng Hao was about to put his spear away, Lord White grabbed it, then stared into Meng Hao's eyes. A vicious gleam could be seen in his own eyes, and the eternal aura around him grew stronger. Shockingly, an illusory ancient scripture suddenly appeared behind him, upon which were written three characters: Mountain and Sea Scripture. As the ancient scripture opened, Lord White's aura began to grow stronger. Almost in the same moment that the protection of the ancient scripture appeared, Meng Hao's eternal stratum began to surge with even more madness. Suddenly, a piercing cry like that of a silkworm began to echo out from inside of him, and behind him, a shocking illusory image appeared. It was the eyeless larva. This was the first time since the eyeless larva had become a part of his eternal stratum that it ever appeared in this way. As soon as it became visible, it turned to Lord White and howled. 1. The eyeless larva was last mentioned in chapter 693 when Meng Hao used it to acquire the eternal stratum. Lord White's face flickered with shock as he suddenly realized that Meng Hao had also cultivated some of the mountain and sea scripture. An incomplete mountain and sea scripture, huh? Lord White said with a cold snort. However, he was still shocked. He could sense the explosive violence within his Green Emperor's eternal incantation, and how it wished to attack the eyeless larva behind Meng Hao and fight with it to the death. Meng Hao's eyes went wide as he realized that his opponent intended to take away his demon weapon. He was not the type of person to let something like that happen lightly, so instead, he let go of it and uttered a single word. Detonate? As soon as the word left his mouth, demon weapon Lomlatum exploded with a huge bang. Once again, Lord White was injured, and yet, with his eternal aura at work, he quickly began to recover. Lord White looked deeply at Meng Hao. Without saying another word, he fell back to give himself time to heal and buy some more time. Earlier, he had not underestimated Meng Hao, but now, he wanted to kill him more than ever. It had been a very, very long time since he had experienced the sensation of imminent death that he had moments ago. Were it not for the profundity of his divine ability, then with the way he had been stabbed in the forehead just now, while it wouldn't have killed him, it would have resulted in a grievous injury. After the demon weapon exploded, it transformed into streams of black mist that swirled back to collect together near Meng Hao. The mountain and sea scripture, Meng Hao said, an unsightly expression on his face. From what he understood, the mountain and sea scripture was a combination of the three classic scriptures of the mountain and sea realm. Apparently, Lord White had actually cultivated the mountain and sea scripture, but to a far higher level than Meng Hao. After all, Meng Hao had used fragments of the actual scripture, and then relied on his own deductive powers to make alterations as he had seen fit. 2. As a brief reminder, Meng Hao got the Sublime Spirit scripture way back in the Reliance sect. It set him on the path of perfection, which eventually led to the eternal. The Sublime Spirit scripture was described as one of the three great classic scriptures, along with the Tao Divinity scripture and the Heaven Severing scripture. P.S. This line in the original Chinese actually contains a mistake which I fixed. If any of you are reading along in Chinese as well, you will probably notice this. However, Meng Hao had the feeling that if his eternal stratum could merge with the Green Emperor's eternal incantation of his opponent, then his own eternal stratum would increase by a whole level. I wonder if there is something beyond the eternal, Meng Hao thought, his eyes shining brightly. All of a sudden, he had yet another reason to kill Lord White. The wound on Lord White's forehead was rapidly healing up, and it seemed as if it would only be moments before it was completely restored. Meng Hao's eyes flickered, and he took 2 steps forward, which were his 6th and 7th steps respectively. The instant that his 7th step landed, Meng Hao's energy spiked. Something like a roar echoed out to the ends of the starry sky as a terrifying foot suddenly appeared. It was like a planet descending from above, causing massive rumbling sounds to echo out as it crushed down toward Lord White. This was none other than the ability he had learned from Su Yan, who was still in his bag of holding, the 7 God Steps. As soon as that huge foot appeared up in the starry sky, Lord White's face fell yet again, filling with disbelief. The 7 God Steps, that's impossible. Shockingly, he recognized this particular Taoist magic of Meng Hao's. Instantly, Lord White bit the tip of his tongue and spit out a mouthful of blood. That blood rapidly expanded, instantly transforming into a sea of blood, which seethed out across the starry sky to slam into the incoming foot. The resulting massive explosion, Meng Hao's energy surged, and the killing intent in his eyes intensified. Next, his left hand flashed in an incantation gesture, and the meat jelly appeared. Muttering disconsolately, it transformed into a set of armor which covered Meng Hao. Then Meng Hao extended his right hand, and the copper mirror transformed into a beam of multicolored light as it, along with the grumbling parrot, transformed into a pitch-black battle weapon. The instant the battle weapon appeared, Meng Hao's desire to fight exploded out. The starry sky went dark, and the void trembled. Meng Hao's murderous aura rose to shocking heights as he slashed his blade out toward the fleeing Lord White. Die, he roared. The sensation of deadly crisis that exploded up within Lord White was impossible to describe. In fact, the sensation far exceeded the feeling he had experienced when Meng Hao had gone all out to attack him with demon weapon Lone Latum. And yet, there was something different about it. Demon weapon Lone Latum had appeared completely unexpectedly, giving him no time to react. In this moment, although the sensation of deadly crisis was more intense, at least he had a moment to prepare. Unfortunately, Lord White was still in the middle of utilizing his Green Emperor's eternal incantation to restore himself. He couldn't unleash his peak level of power, causing a vicious, intense gleam to appear in his eyes. Glaring at Meng Hao, he roared extermination. In that moment, essence fluctuations appeared, which were none other than the ripples of the essence of extermination. Power essence. He wasn't finished yet, though. As soon as the essence of extermination appeared, a second shocking essence aura roiled up inside of him. The void around him distorted, and boundless ripples spread out through the starry sky from his second essence. The essence of power. That was not the power of the fleshly body, but rather, power incited from within the starry sky. Curse. Land. Time. Lord White knew that this was a moment of extreme crisis, and as of this moment, fully realized how difficult it was to deal with Meng Hao. Furthermore, he also knew that he had lost out on an opportunity to seize the initiative. He had ceded that to Meng Hao, who was clearly extremely domineering. Once he got going, he kept going without stop. Lord White had never encountered someone who fought like this in the past, but he could tell that once Meng Hao built up enough momentum, it would be difficult to stop him, and he would only continue to grow stronger. 5 Essence Dao, Lord White cried, spreading his hands out wide in Meng Hao's direction and then pushing forward. His clothes and hair whipped about, and his cultivation base exploded out, merging with the starry sky, connecting with the heavens, drawing upon the boundless energy of heaven and earth, sucking it into his body. It was like he became a huge black hole which consumed the energy of heaven and earth. It poured into his body, which became like a transfer point for that energy, which he then sent out, to become 5 different essences. This was a way of using essence that was completely new to Meng Hao. Instead of drawing upon the powers of the world and wielding them, it took heaven and earth and transformed it within oneself. The latter was definitely more domineering than the former. Either die or screw the hell off, roared Lord White. His 5 essences became 5 natural laws, filling the entire world, sweeping through the heavens, instantly enveloping Meng Hao. A will of extermination that could erase emotions and obliterate the soul. A magic embodying the essence of power that could crush the body and smash the mind. A Tao of cursing that could defile the blood and eradicate blood vessels. An essence of land which could bury corpses and sever chi passageways. The quintessence of time, the ultimate of the 5 essences, which could reach through time to slaughter the enemy. The starry sky trembled, and within that world of essence and natural law, blood oozed out of Meng Hao's eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. However, his eyes were shining brightly, and his desire to fight was no less than before. Hefting the battle weapon, he slashed it out in attack. It was an extraordinary showdown. The red-haired old man and the others had long since retreated from their position 3,000 meters away. They were now 30,000 meters away, where they sent their divine sense out to observe the fierce fighting going on between Meng Hao and Lord White. All 4 of their faces were completely pale, and their hearts were battered with waves of shock. Chapter 1298, Reproaching Seal. The pitch-black battle weapon sliced through the starry sky, turning into a beam of mysterious light that could sever all things, extinguish all auras. It slashed into Lord White's 5 unleashed essences, starting with the essence of extermination. Meng Hao shuddered as the meat jelly armor absorbed the brunt of the force. The battle weapon sliced like a sharp knife through bamboo as it destroyed the essence of extermination and continued onward. In the blink of an eye, Lord White's magic of the essence of power closed in. It was capable of disrupting all sorts of power, be they of the fleshly body or the cultivation base. It was like lightness and heaviness, and at the same time, heaviness and lightness. The intense disparity caused Meng Hao to cough up a mouthful of blood. His face paled as the meat jelly armor shivered. "Sever!" Meng Hao roared, his eyes completely bloodshot. Disregarding any injuries, he used all of the power of the battle weapon to slash down. Rumbling sounds filled the starry sky, which seemed to be on the verge of being sliced apart. The battle weapon sliced through the essence of power like a hot knife through butter. However, the Tao of the curse essence then became a boundless fog that completely surrounded Meng Hao. His body began to wither, and the meat jelly armor let out a plaintive cry. Cracking sounds began to emanate, as if it were on the verge of shattering. Lord White's essences were far beyond those of ordinary five essences Tao sovereigns. They were terrifying to a degree that Meng Hao had never seen before. "You're definitely not weak," Lord White said in a sinister voice. "However, in the end, you have too few essences. As an all-heaven Tao immortal, you are powerful, but you cannot truly defy the heavens, nor can you defy me." The curse power mist roiled, swirling around Meng Hao as if it wished to burrow into him through the pores on his skin. A vicious expression could be seen on Meng Hao's face as the battle weapon slashed out with scintillating, mysterious light. Ignoring the serious injuries that were being inflicted on him, Meng Hao slashed through the curse power, toward Lord White. However, there was still plenty of essence power in between them. Next was the essence of land, which filled the space between them with what seemed to be planets and continents. At this point, the meat jelly armor shattered into pieces, which then reformed into the shape of the meat jelly. It seemed extremely weak, and immediately transformed into a gray light that shot back into Meng Hao's bag of holding. He lost the meat jelly armor, but in the moment before it disappeared, it still helped him to resist the power of the essence of land. Blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth, but he still shot forward like lightning, like a shooting star, slamming into the essence, slicing through with the battle weapon, backed by all the power of an all-heaven Tao immortal. The starry sky trembled, and everything dimmed. As the battle weapon slashed out, massive pressure exploded out, allowing Meng Hao to blast through the planets and continents to appear directly in front of Lord White. However, it was in this moment that Lord White's final essence erupted out. It was none other than timeshift magic, which caused the world to distort and run in reverse. It was like a wind of time, which caused all of the other four essences which Meng Hao had already vanquished to suddenly appear again. No beginning and no end. That is time. Since you cannot defeat my five essences magic, then you do not qualify to be my opponent. As Lord White's voice undulated out, Meng Hao once again coughed up a mouthful of blood as his internal injuries flared. He could no longer sustain the battle weapon, which vanished, returning to the form of a copper mirror, which flew back into Meng Hao's bag of holding. In that moment, the five essences magic was restored, forming something like the image of a world up in the starry sky. This was Lord White's five essences world, a world in which the flow of time was distorted, in which lands rumbled, in which the power of extermination threw everything into chaos, in which extermination and curses flowed through heaven and earth, and which pulsed with the essence of power. It was a shocking world which seemed capable of sweeping over anything. It immediately began to rumble through the air, crashing down toward Meng Hao. A sensation of deadly crisis surged up inside of Meng Hao. His eyes were bloodshot, and inside he was sighing. However, in that very instant, the will to fight burned even hotter in his eyes. "If a sudden onslaught won't work, then I'll change styles." Flames danced within Meng Hao's eyes. As the shocking essence whirled crushed down toward him, he performed a double-handed incantation gesture, which instantly caused the fluctuations of the League of Demon Sealers to spring up inside him. The League of Demon Sealers can seal greater demons of heaven and earth. I wonder if perhaps essences can also be sealed. Meng Hao's eyes flickered with a strange light as he became more convinced that his idea would work. Without any further hesitation, he performed an incantation gesture and then waved his finger toward the incoming essence world. Eighth Demon Sealing Hex. Rumble. Meng Hao's cultivation base, life force, soul, divine sense, everything that was him flowed into the demon-sealing hexing magic which he was unleashing. That image of a world which seemed so impossible to fight back against, all of a sudden seemed to slow down. Although no observer would notice this, Meng Hao could sense what was happening. As soon as he unleashed the eighth demon-sealing hex, Countless, innumerable strands of light appeared to entangle the essence world, causing it to falter. "It's working." Meng Hao's eyes glittered, and even as a look of shock appeared on Lord White's face, he performed another incantation gesture and then waved his finger again. Demon Sealing 7th Hex. Demon Sealing 6th Hex. Demon Sealing 5th Hex. Karma, Life Death. Inside Outside. 3 hexing magics all erupted out of Meng Hao, flowing out through his finger. Instantly, the starry sky went silent, and the essence world experienced a heaven-shaking, earth-toppling transformation. It stopped in place, and was now surrounded by a boundless gray mist, which writhed and seethed as numerous magical symbols appeared on its surface. That was none other than the manifestation of the life-death hexing. Simultaneously, karma threads appeared on the essence world, spreading out into the void, connecting it to who knew how many people. Most of those threads connected it to Lord White, and yet, as of this moment, the karma threads were merging together to transform into numerous sealing marks. This was karmic hexing. Finally, a massive power of expulsion descended from the starry sky onto the essence world. Suddenly, the essence world experienced a bizarre transformation. First, it increased in size dramatically, then it shrank down as the power of the inside-outside hex exploded out. "Impossible," Lord White cried hoarsely. Meng Hao had experienced a sudden stroke of inspiration, and now his eyes were shining brightly as his 4 hexing magics descended onto the essence world. It was at this point that the demon-sealing Jade within his bag of holding began to speak in its archaic voice after having been silent for so long. Demon-sealing hexing magic can seal the greater demons of heaven and earth. This is righteous bestowal. Demon-sealing hexing magic can seal the magic of all living things. This is the reproaching seal. Meng Hao's mind spun as the voice echoed out within him. He then raised his right hand, and his eyes shone mysteriously as he pushed out toward the essence world. "Reproaching seal," he said. As soon as the 2 words left his mouth, a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering sound erupted out, causing the starry sky to tremble. At the same time, an enormous magical symbol appeared, which then shot down onto the essence world, sealing it. Sealing the essences. Instantly, the entire essence world went still, almost as if it had been turned into stone. No ripples emanated from it, and its aura was gone. Lord White, who was hovering not too far off, experienced a backlash and coughed up a huge mouthful of blood. He didn't recognize the demon-sealing hexing magic, but it reminded him of something that had left him with a deep impression long ago, and that was the Tao of Lord Li. Lord White's face flickered as he realized that his connection with his essence had been severed. Although it wasn't anything permanent at the moment, he was completely incapable of unleashing essence power. Meng Hao was equally shaken. He looked at the sealed essence world and could sense the intense fluctuations of the demon-sealing hexing magic inside of him. Gradually, the glow in his eyes grew brighter. Now Lord White was looking at Meng Hao, not just with fear, but with the intense desire to kill him. "Even without essence, I can still cut you down," he said, waving his sleeve. His right hand then shot out toward the starry sky in a clawing motion. Instantly, 5 rifts were torn open. 5 venoms of the 7th sea, sow chaos in the skies of the mountains and seas, disturb the peace of all living things. Lord White bit the tip of his tongue and spit out a mouthful of blood. Instantly, it became a blood sea which shot up toward the 5 rifts and then poured into them. Next, thumping sounds began to emanate out. Apparently, there were entities inside of those rifts who were breaking through a barrier, attempting to pass through the rifts. With each thump, the starry sky trembled. Suddenly, cracking sounds could be heard as 2 spindly antennae burst out from within one of the rifts. They were followed by a vicious bug which scuttled out rapidly. Soon, a 30,000-meter pitch-black centipede appeared in the starry sky. As soon as it appeared, it let out a shocking screech which caused all hearts to tremble. Next, cracking sounds echoed out from the second rift as a crimson-red, 3-horned viper popped out, tens of thousands of meters long, its forked tongue flickering, its eyes gleaming coldly. It threw its head back and howled as, all of a sudden, countless eyes appeared all over its body. Next, cracking sounds could be heard from the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rifts as more creatures emerged. There was an enormous scorpion, surrounded by swirling black mist, and a violet toad as big as a mountain. Last of all was a 30,000-meter-long lizard with rugged scales that dripped with slime. It was a completely shocking sight. 5 venoms killed this person. Lord White's eyes flickered, and the 5 venomous creatures roared as they charged toward Meng Hao.